Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge pop-up bar. One of our impromptu evenings to come on and discuss all things wonderful in the world of Swindon Town, or unfortunately, as was per last night, some things that weren't so wonderful. Sadly, 9 months of, more often than not, spectacular entertainment, ups and downs, the roller coaster that is Swindon Town, came to an end with a disappointing away defeat on penalties to Port Vale. You won't need me to tell you all about that. Nonetheless, it's happened. There was a number of talking points coming off the back of last night's game, which we're going to be getting into tonight, along with debut host Chris Phillips. Chris, good evening. How are you?
Not bad, Hannah's mate. Not bad. Well, all things considering.
Oh, yeah, all things considering, a difficult evening for us to stomach, Chris, last night, and yet difficult on a number of fronts. And the fallout today on social media has been wretched and depressing to consume. It's always difficult falling at the type of hurdle that we fell at last night, but none more so when it involves the controversies of pitch invasions, which have been a blight on our game and are a hot topic in today's news. And another fellow who's going to be joining us tonight is the wonderful Andrew Hawes, who was on the mic for BBC Radio Wiltshire last night. Andrew, good evening. How are you? Are you there, Andrew? He may well be there, but he can't speak. Chris, you still hearing me loud and clear?
Yep. All good, all good.
Super. At some point, I'm sure Andrew will jump on. Obviously, we're all hot off the back of last night. I think things are starting to settle down. I think, obviously, it's going to be a topic of debate. We can't avoid talking about the obvious of last night, but we also now have to be mindful that after much public outcry, particularly from the Swindon Town quarters, we are talking about a live police investigation. So, nonetheless, we are going to have to be very careful about what we do say. But what we will be able to do through this show is provide appropriate signposting for anyone that either recorded anything or has anything to share with both Wiltshire Police and Staffordshire Police, who are collaborating on that investigation. I believe it's being led by staffs, and that Wiltshire Police have been very live across all the channels today, asking people for information. I would say this. If you're as outraged as I was last night about some of the things that unfolded no further than about 10 feet from my face, please do make a point of sharing what you have with the police. There is no point feeling that sense of outrage, disgust, frustration, annoyance if you don't do something about it. One of the words that I saw being bounded around on social media today is that delightful word that people that like to break the law use to intimidate people that would otherwise do good things, which is grass. It's not about grassing. It's about doing the right thing. One of the things that absolutely sickened me to the stomach today was when I read an account from Junior Autism's parents, of children being ushered away from a hail of bottles and coins, children being struck in the head, struck in the face as that was happening. As well as some of the choice things that I had to suffer. I wouldn't want anyone having to put up with that kind of treatment. So please, if that's your mindset, do me a favour. If grass is part of your vernacular and you seem to feel that there's an issue with doing the right thing, unfollow me straight away. Don't follow me again. I've got a block button and a mute button you have rather a block button and a mute button for a reason. Please use them. Because I'd appreciate it, and no doubt any right-minded person probably would. So, I mean, Chris, we're probably the best way to sort of progress moving forward is we'll just sort of try and sort of dissect how last night folded. I mean, how was your evening, Chris? Tell me all about how your evening unfolded.
Well, I got into Manchester at about 3:00 to meet a friend, because obviously we're weren't allowed in any pubs in Burslem. We decided Manchester, and then we just jumped on the train straight into the ground, and then from there, the atmosphere in there was superb. Once we got into there, it's good natured, and we're all fairly confident when it started. And but that first half, it was a downer.
Yeah, I mean, look, Chris, it's interesting because I think the first thing that struck me, and I don't know whether anyone has actually confirmed this now, but there was that as I've emerged at the rear of the stand and the pitch has unfolded in front of me, the pitch seemed to have lost about 3, 4, 5 meters from the right hand side. Now, I didn't go to the Vale game away earlier in the season, but it looked like the pitch had been amended. But clearly, at the same time, I was under the impression that pitches can't be amended during the season. So it would be interesting if anyone can come on and give a view on that. But it straight away kind of got me, not, I wouldn't say fearing the worst, but you knew that, I immediately started considering the dark arts and whatnot, because a lot had been made about us making the most of the space that the pitch afforded at Vale. And it looked to me that there weren't as much space as we were possibly expecting. Chris, we'll see if we can get Andrew back on at this stage. Andrew, are you listening? Are you with us?
Yes. Sorry about my technical incompetence.
Don't be so silly, Andrew. Andrew, can you shed any light on that? Was the pitch amended last night? Are you aware?
Not that I know of. I don't immediately think so. From trying to remember back to the January game to last night, I think it was it. Must have been, I didn't immediately come in and get that sense you did, and again, as far as I'm aware of the rules as you are, I don't think you can amend the pitch mid-season either.
Sorry, Chris.
I was going to say, I was at the game in January, but obviously was watching it from the other end of the pitch. And last night, I actually thought, certainly on from where we were looking at it, the left touchline, it did look like it had come in a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, it was interesting. Listen, I'm not going to sit here tonight and start making excuses for our sort of relatively stunted performance in the first half. So it's not a question of that. It's more an indication that I couldn't quite put my finger on why we just didn't seem to be able to get things going last night. The sort of raking diagonal passes I was expecting didn't seem to materialise. When they did, they were inevitably going out of play. And the boys all seemed a little bit sixes and sevens for the first 45. But I mean, let's have a pick through. Let's have. I mean, we'll have a if we can a pick through the lineup. So we started with Wardy in goal. We could have no complaints there, Chris, could we? With Wardy continuing to keep the goalkeeper's gloves.
It's done nothing wrong as well, and I think he was a bit harsh to drop him earlier in the season, just as soon as Wallacott came back. But no complaints with Ward in there, because he's actually commanded his area quite well, and is a big part of how Baudry and Conroy have had that good solid partnership over the last 5 or 6 games.
Yeah, and Andrew, I mean, what were your thoughts on Wardy starting? I mean, the goalkeeping position pretty much picked itself, did it not, last night?
Yeah, I don't think there was ever any real danger of him being replaced for the second leg. He'd had a solid enough first leg. He's done pretty well. I think that point Chris makes about him, looking or trying to be authoritative in the 6-yard box does count for something, and has helped what's been a pretty good defensive record.
Yeah, completely agree. And we talked in the build-up to the game the recent excellent form of both Dion Conroy and Matthew Bowdry. And as anyone knows me, as a former goalkeeper myself, I've been espousing the virtues of Wardy, and I've been pointing to Wardy as one of the big reasons why I think they're playing with renewed vigour and confidence, purely because of the way that he does command that box. So yeah, for me, no brainer. Selection. So obviously it was unchanged from the previous game, Chris. Selection at right back was Manny Egbo again. I mean, clearly there is always an option that bringing in an Akin Odimayo. We have options in that position, although Rob Hunt's injured. But there could be no complaints with Manny lining up again.
No, I actually think the way we play, Egbo and Ayondolo are the ideal fullbacks in there, because we need them to be getting on, because that's where without them there's no width, and obviously with Tomlinson unavailable, really Ayondolo, who was brilliant in midfield, he just has to drop back there.
Yeah, and interestingly, I think Ellis attracted a lot of criticism earlier in the season for some of his performances at left back, where he showed lots of endeavour going forward, but was perhaps being criticised for being found out a little bit in terms of defensive duties. But of late, when Ellis has slotted back in at left back, he's been giving us decent performances. Chris, would you not agree?
He has that. There was a couple of times that went past him in that first half, but over the game, certainly in the second half, he was probably the best player on the pitch. Certainly in a yellow shirt, he was, or a gold shirt.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I'm going to only slightly disagree with you there, because I think the player who was by far and away for me the best player on the pitch, let alone the best player for Town, was the recently reinvigorated Matthew Bowdry. Now, Andrew, what was your view on Bowdry's performance?
Yeah, no, I thought he was tremendous. I think in one of our very sort of fitful discussions in the car on the way back, in between lots of silence, we were kind of trying to pick out who you'd look at as the man of the match. And again, this sort of recent spell, he's looked incredibly fit. He's been kind of strong in the air, and kind of almost a sort of confidence and exuberance on the ball as well. Again, there was another one of those moments where I think it was in the second half when he's in a bit of trouble. He's in a bit of trouble initially. It looks like down by the byline, and yet kind of weaves his way forward and starts prompting another potential counterattack. So it's very hard to think of anyone else who came out of the night as well as he did.
Yeah, I mean, I know exactly the moments you're talking about. In fact, I think there were 3, maybe 4 wonderful moments where he was under a lot of pressure. And he's just got that little drop of a shoulder where he sends the striker one way and suddenly just engineers 3-4 yards of space and is able to get himself out of trouble with a short pass left or right. I thought Bowdry was outstanding. Alongside Bowdry, Chris, we had Town skipper Dion Conroy. What did you make of Dion's performance, Chris?
I'll just go back to Bowdry for a minute there as well. I think over the last 6 or 7 games, he's probably been in the conversation for man of the match in every one of them. He's and that obviously when we needed those 4 wins or 5 as it was with the first leg, in the partnership between Bowdry and Conroy has been so key to that. They've just worked so well together, the communication and whatnot. And obviously over the season we've struggled defensively, and a big part of that is how often the 2 centre backs have changed. And the key to that was with Ward behind them and those 2 there, the 3 of them have just formed the backbone of what got us those wins when we really needed them.
Yeah, well, Chris, in the last show, we talked a lot, and we'll come on to Dion right now. But I mean, over the last sort of, particularly in the last show, there was a lot of conversation about the triangle. Kevin Metcalfe spoke with great eloquence on the last show about the foundation that the triangle of Ward, Bowdry and Conroy has given the team, and the confidence that appears to give the team, and the foundation that gives the team to operate from. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think Bowdry's been excellent. We come back to Bowdry in a touch, but I mean, I would like you to have a little bit of a consideration. Andrew, I don't know if Bowdry has said anything to you potentially about another year at the county ground, but I think just given the nature of his performances, I think it's something that we've got to consider. But that conversation is not just for yet, because I wanted to spend a bit of time on Dion, who, for me, not only had an excellent performance alongside Bowdry last night, but in the penalty shootout, kept his nerve and fired an absolute beauty home. But first, there's a couple of things I want to talk about Dion. But first things first, let's Chris, let me get your views on what you saw last night, and hopefully you saw the same performance I did.
I think his confidence at the moment. I think he very much is a confidence player, and he's been harshly criticised by some fans through this season, well over the top. But again, he's been really good over the last few games, and I thought last night again, it was good because some of those, his ball playing is a big part of how we play.
Yeah, I completely agree. The sort of more worryingly, I'm on a couple of WhatsApp groups with a few people that might refer to themselves as being a bit in the know, shall we say. And I've also noticed pop up on social media some of these rumours as well. But Andrew, I don't know if it's been picked up at your end, but I've been noticing rumours today linking Dion Conroy with a link up with former manager Richie Wellens at Leyton Orient. Is that anything that's come across your desk?
It hasn't yet. I don't think you'd rule it out at all. I mean, he's sort of the of London Essex, so maybe that makes some sort of sense geographically. Maybe he has a certain amount of frustration. I'm not really sure with how some of the fans are with him. He's never kind of said that, but he is kind of out of contract, and he's in a place where he can look for a move, and whether he feels he's sort of done his time at Swindon or not. But he was good last night. I think you look both at Baudry and Conroy, and you think of them as ball playing centre halves, but they were physically over the two legs very competitive with the Port Vale strikers, I thought.
Yeah, and they did have their hands full as well, because James Williams, as he proved last night, is a threat. Was a thorn in our side. He is a lot to handle, but bar his goal, which having looked at the replays, maybe wasn't as offside as we maybe thought it was at the game. They largely kept him quiet, didn't they?
I think they did, but the one thing I will say as well about Conroy as well, he's got more of a reputation, sort of like a ball playing centre half, but he's very good in the air as well, and it was winning a lot in there that was helpful.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Chris, and yet that part of his game has always been something that people have been kind of highly critical of, particularly earlier in the season, when it was kind of, he became a pantomime villain somewhat, certain sections of the Town Crown. Well, listen, I mean, obviously, my message to Dion, if he was listening in, is that, he's shown immense character, battling back, winning back over some of his doubters in a season where he's probably played more football than at any point in his career. Ali Willits talked a couple of weeks ago about certain players. She didn't mention names, but she talked about certain players with neurological issues in relation to injury and fitness, that the fitness team and the medical team have worked very hard on to sort of help them overcome any doubts about their own body. And I mean, obviously, if that is something that has been sort of, concerning Dion, and it is something he's got over, then I would say, look, Dion, there is no need to twist. But at the same time, I think it's that it is realistic, as Andrew said, Chris. Leyton Orient would be a short jump from his roots. Yeah. They may well be in a position to offer him more money, offer him the same level of responsibility, perhaps, that he enjoys at Swindon as captain. And Richie Wellens is a manager that clearly he has a great rapport with. So it's a rumour that we'll watch with interest, I think is the best way to describe it. Now, we're moving up through the side. So, again, as we said, unchanged from the first leg. So we had Johnny Williams on the width of the midfield three. No real reason to be concerned about Johnny Williams slotting in there. Chris, what did you make of his performance?
I thought, Williams was very busy, as it always is, and it was certainly took some heavy challenges in there. But that's every game. It's like I think it was on with Vic the other night. Ali was saying that no one comes off with more bruises and bashes than Johnny does.
Yeah, and yeah, he was buffeted, Andrew, fair to say, last night. Was it? I mean, you're obviously a lot closer to the local sort of radio broadcasters. Were there any comments coming from them in relation to Williams' performance, or because he spent a fair bit of time on the deck, but at the same time that did seem to be off the back of robust challenges as opposed to any theatrics. Was there anything you picked up from the commentary box in relation to that?
Not a lot. We kind of keep a safe gap between ourselves and Radio Stoke, so we don't kind of shout over each other. Essentially, it felt like a very sort of familiar game for Johnny Williams in terms of getting that robust challenges. I'm not sure you look at any of the kind of midfield and say they were bad, but they weren't. I don't think as a collective, and perhaps this is some of just the kind of industry and the ability Port Vale had and the discipline, they should have shut them down. As a collective, I didn't think they were the kind of creative force we know they can be.
Yeah, I would have said that as well. often as well. They're a bit dynamic. I mean, you see the runs from Payne, the runs from Williams. They just didn't seem to get it together last night for one reason or another.
Yeah, Chris, I agree. I agree with yourself as well, Andrew. I mean, the comments that I was making in the build up to this game was that it was essential that clearly we got on the ball, imposed our style of play, and they are quite clearly on their day by far and away the best midfield trio in Reid, Williams, and Payne anywhere in that division. I keep using the word technicians to describe them versus anything else I've seen. Now, I haven't seen 3 technicians in the midfield in any other side in this league. So, I was a little frustrated that we just didn't seem to get the ball into them. We didn't seem to get those little triangles zipping about. We didn't really see any kind of passes from them that was sort of splitting the centre halves and posing any questions. But okay, so dropping back onto Louis Reid. I mean, again, we won't repeat ourselves. It seemed to be a quiet performance from Louis Reid versus what we used to. It was all very neat and tidy, wasn't it? But if Louis Reid is an 8, I was kind of looking last night and thinking he was more of a 6. Where was your head at, Chris?
I would probably think about that as well, because and I think it stems more from the fact that how good he's been, and so when he's average, you think he's had a bad game.
Yeah.
When he's not had a bad game, he's just not as good as he normally is.
I completely agree with you, Andrew. What was your take on Reedy's performance last night?
Yeah, again, it seems like we've all sort of seen a fairly similar game, haven't we? There, certainly couldn't say it was bad, but you saw the occasional moment where he would sort of really manipulate the ball, be that technician you talked about, and quickly switch the play from left to right. You saw it at times, but again, some of it comes down to the fact that Port Vale just worked so hard and congested that midfield and did a lot of sort of closing down whenever we tried to play out from the back, and that worked. And that they made a mess of quite a lot of the midfield, Port Vale, in a good way for them, and it made for more of the sort of ragged flicker off their game that they'd want.
Yeah. I mean, and of the 3 midfielders, so we'd spend a bit of time on Jack Payne, because I mean, for me, he was the pick of the midfield 3. I think he's very busy. He got himself into some areas where he was posing some questions, but again, if we're looking at Jack to be, a typical sort of 7 or 8, again, it was a solid 6, and that's by no means kind of doing the midfield 3 down. It's just like as Andrew said, I think a lot of that just came down. You got to give credit where credit's due. I think Port Vale did a very, very good job on them. In my mind's eye, I'd envisaged going into this game with Jack Payne engineering space and working their keeper, particularly from distance. And sadly, we just didn't really see any of that, which, was a bit of a shame. Chris, your critique on Jack Payne, was there anything in particular that stuck out, or anything?
I just think it was, I think it's much the same as the others. But one thing I will say, what that midfield needed last night was Jordan Lydon. And one thing as well, going back to Reid, we didn't really see it too much last night because we're at the other end. But that clearance off the line in extra time, that was going in. Yeah,
completely.
But as well, but with Payne, I think it's much the same as them all. They were 6 when if all 3 of them, I would say I would give a 6 to, but we needed one of them to be a 7 or an 8, and we just didn't get that. So we just never really got going. And because they didn't really get going, we never didn't have anything ahead of them.
Yeah, I completely agree. So we'll move up to our forward line. So frustrating for me, tipped by many, including myself, to be the guy that would probably be I thought he would be the winner, the game changer last night. For some reason, I'd lumped on young Louis Barry to really tickle our fancy. I
actually mentioned Louis Barry, I think, on the other night when we were talking. When was it?
Yes,
Tuesday night? No, Wednesday night, was it?
Yeah.
He just didn't get into the game. Well, I don't think I really had the Barry or McCurdy really got into the game, and that's just why we struggled, because we didn't really create a great chance. I think the best chance we had was probably the one that Baudry put over.
Yes. Yeah, completely agree. it was. I mean, I was right behind the goal. I was 3 or 4 rows back. And yeah, the Baldry chance. I mean, you could see that it was written all over his face. I mean, it's gilt edged. He obviously he tried to sort of bend his leg round the defender, flick it in, and it's gone a couple of yards over, which was a shame. But I mean, going back to Louis Barry, I think it was a very frustrating performance in that we didn't really get the ball into his feet. We didn't really give him much opportunity to exploit any kind of space. I thought Port Vale were very compact and very well drilled at the back. And it was certainly for young Louis a game to forget. And obviously he's been tweeting today on social media. There is, pretty much his cheerio tweets. Obviously he didn't get a chance because of events at the end of the game to come on and say goodbye. But kind of a very disappointing way for Louis Barry to end his time in Wiltshire, Chris, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, what is he? 18 years old. So you're going to get that inconsistency. I mean, we've seen how good he can be. And then we've seen him just not be in games, but that's going to happen with an 18-year-old kid. So I think it needed us to have the ball further up to really get him into the game, and then because what we want him to do is to be running onto those fullbacks, and he just didn't really have that opportunity.
Yeah. Okay, so switching to the other side. A performance that the home fans certainly revelled in, particularly at the final whistle, was a young Mr. McCurdy returning to Port Vale, having done the damage up there earlier in the season. A lot of talk around, almost like he was inviting attention from the crowd. He's performed. He got a silly red card for a little bit of petulance towards the linesman. Throwing up sort of glasses signs at him, and then obviously seeing a flash of yellow. It was almost the same sort of situation as Barry, wasn't it? I mean, their fullbacks just seemed to have the measure of Harry McCurdy last night, Chris.
It was, and I thought as well that they obviously knew how dangerous he was. So every time he got the ball, there was 3 of them on him, and there was just nowhere for him to go. And a lot of the time when he was running, there was no option for him. So he was running into no man's land because they were eventually going to get the ball off him. And there was no outlet pass for him there.
Yeah. Andrew, what was the kind of theme of the commentary? Obviously, I wasn't listening for obvious reasons. What was the theme of the commentary around Harry McCurdy from your vantage point? Any hot takes from you?
Well, God help us if there are. I mean, I think I'd kind of disagree slightly. I feel it felt a bit more like a question of supply at times. I actually thought, because our sort of commentary position is quite close to the pitch, sort of kind of almost level with the edge of the penalty area that was closest to the Swindon fans last night. When he actually got the ball, I kind of thought he still looked quite progressive and quite dynamic. It felt a bit more like I say, a question of support. And you think of the moment where it's almost identical to the way he won the penalty at Walsall, where Payne gets the ball and puts him out to him on the right hand side. Well, I mean, when he got that ball, there's just like one runner supporting him in Davison, and Vale have got the extra men back. So. Yeah. I actually would possibly be kinder to his performance than most people, penalty apart. And I do feel it was a bit more the fact that midfield couldn't function to feed him the ball more than what he did when he had the ball, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And to be very clear, I mean, I certainly wouldn't be a Harry McCurdy basher on the back of last night. I think it was just difficult conditions for him because obviously he was dealing with the consistent cat calls. And essentially, obviously once he's missed his penalty, the thing that I found most regrettable, and it's something that, I think we should spend a little bit of time about, is the fallout to the Harry McCurdy grin. Now, there seems to be a view amongst certain sections of the town fans on social media that Harry McCurdy's reaction to missing his penalty was one of "I couldn't care less," or I'm fancy down. I'm in this for myself, whatever it might be. But the indication seemed to be that he couldn't give 2 hoots. Now, I'll say this, and I just want to make this very, very, very clear. I was very, very lucky a couple of weeks ago to spend a lot of time in the company of the Town First team and getting to understand the characters and what makes them tick. And if there is one player in our dressing room that really, really does care about Swindon Town and has built a very, very tight relationship and affinity with Swindon Town, it's Harry McCurdy. Harry McCurdy does, when it comes to addressing the media and speaking his mind, does speak with a certain sort of lack of filter, would be probably the best way to put it. And I think Harry McCurdy has been described by a lot of Town fans as being a bit of a maverick, someone that we should celebrate. Now, with that, there are going to come certain reactions at certain times that some of us might find kind of hard to reconcile. But people do need to realise that if something happens under extreme pressure conditions like that, you can sometimes see reactions from people with characteristics like Harry that may be a little bit different to the theatrics that we might want to see, i.e. curling up on the ground, tears in his eyes, etc. For some people, laughter is a coping mechanism. For some people, it is just one of those. It's like an explosion of emotion. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that because I'm a great Harry McCurdy apologist, but I do think some of the reaction to his facial expressions having missed that penalty was a bit of an overreaction. I mean, Chris, have you got a view sort of either in line or counter to that?
I think this, with McCurdy on the whole, it's you know what he is, and you accept everything that comes with him because that's what makes him the player he is. He thrives a lot more often. I mean, obviously, he didn't come through as much as like last night as he often does, but he thrives on being the bad guy. If remember at Carlisle, did he celebrate in front of every stand, that sort of thing? He just loves being the bad guy. And that last night I didn't really get I've missed and whatnot. I just got the thing that's just Harry McCurdy.
Yeah,
it was. I didn't think the thing I was laughing and thinking, I don't care. I didn't get that impression. Now, I know a lot of people will, and I've seen a lot of people saying, sell him on social media today, but I just thought I think that's just the way that Harry deals with it.
Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, Andrew, I don't know. Hopefully, you were able to pick it up from your position in the commentary box. But if there was one player out there that was tub thumping, beating his chest, waving his hands at the Town fans, trying to get us all going, it was Harry McCurdy. Was that something that you picked up on as well?
Yeah, no, you did see a bit. You did see a bit of that in the sort of second half when he was, kind of urging fans on behind the goal. I can't entirely speak for him or the kind of reaction, whether it's nervous release or whatever. But and I must admit, we've not spoken to him too often. But I think under all the crash bang wallop there is ultimately a serious professional. So I would say that.
Yeah, 110%. A very serious and a very focused, sort of driven professional when it comes to the art of winning, I might add, as was seen on our award show. Because aside from all the hilarity, the language, the theatrics, there was an absolutely steely determination to essentially not be afraid of anyone that we would face in the playoffs. And a certain bring it on attitude, right? Let's have it. The thing that I find very difficult to stomach about people saying, well, sell him, get rid. We're talking about a guy that's got 24 goals in all competitions this season. And who in their right mind makes a case for selling arguably our biggest talisman this season? Because you are talking about one of our players of the season, and I'm absolutely dumbfounded at the level of vitriol that certain Town fans have sent in his direction on the basis of a smile after a penalty miss in a shootout, when he knows he's about to turn around and have essentially 3 stands completely hammering him. That obviously it was a big miss, high pressure moment. It's not something that he's done because he doesn't care. But I just think with Harry McCurdy, we do have a responsibility as Swindon fans to, and I think we have made allowances all season for some of his rather the more mercurial aspects of Harry. And I do think it's important that those allowances continue to be made, because whilst those allowances have been made, we've helped him thrive. And I certainly wouldn't want to be filling his head with nonsense from our fans saying we'll sell him because he doesn't care, because it's absolutely not the case.
I was just
sorry,
saying,
Chris.
those things are what makes Harry McCurdy Harry McCurdy. You get that with him because Ben Garner's managed him absolutely superbly. He's allowed him to be Harry McCurdy, and he's flourished.
Yeah.
Now, if managed him any other way, it could be the way that he's been with Carlisle and Port Vale. He has to be managed in that certain way, and you need to sort of take that other side of him on, and that's what we've done, and that's how we've got the best out of him.
Yeah, completely agree. I completely agree. Another player that seemed to be attracting a little bit of vitriol last night was just to round off our starting lineup was Josh Davison. Andrew, what was your take on Davison's contribution last night?
I think you've got to say, when the midfield isn't working as well as it is to get sort of good quality passes into him or stuff, you had to see more from him in terms of winning the physical battle with Port Vale, getting grip of the ball and holding it up. I think out of last night, he's probably the one that you'd look at and say, unfortunately, struggled the most. I think as usual, you got the willing and you got the running, but you didn't really get that grip off the ball, off your big number 9 that you needed the way the game unfolded.
Do you think that it was sort of Davison's struggles that ultimately led to the midfield not being as maybe as dynamic as they could have been, Andrew? So he's saying like Davison's sort of performance didn't bring them into the mix as much as you would like.
I think there's an element. I think there's an element of that, but when the midfield were being put under pressure, or you did feel you had to go long. At that point, I think you have to look for or hope for more from him. I know he's kind of wrestling away to some extent with 2 or 3 central defenders there, but you kind of think about the sort of one-on-one battles he'd had with Nathan Smith, and most of the time Nathan Smith would come out better with him, and I kind of felt a certain amount of that with Aaron Martin in the first leg as well. They just find a way to get a foot round him or barge him off the ball, or just make it so that he could not settle and really get other people involved in the game.
Yeah. Go on, Chris.
I was just saying, with our system and the way we've played, that number 9 is so crucial to it. It was the same when we had Simpson there playing. Holding the ball up is, we need that central striker to hold the ball up, to get those midfield runners and to get the wide forwards into the game. And Davison didn't have his best game last night, and it was coming back too quickly, so we weren't being able to set up.
Yeah, and it's a real shame that I said this at the time when we signed Josh Davison. I got the impression that he was one that we'd maybe already lined up to come in, and I think Ben Garner's even said as much, that he was someone that we'd lined up to come and relieve some of the burden of Tyree Simpson, as opposed to being a direct replacement infinitum for the remainder of the season. And you do sort of lament Ipswich's decision to recall Tyrese, because the options that we had on the bench last night, I mean, it would have been asking an awful lot of the relatively limited options we had on the bench, with all due respect to them, to come on and have the impact that you need from a big number 9. Fair to say, Chris?
It's fair to say, and I think this is a problem we've had all season, because when we had Simpson, it was the only player who could play that role, and same with Davison. And I think that's been one of our glaring weaknesses all season, is options up front, and certainly in that as a central striker. It's unfair, and I don't even think he's that sort of player to put Parsons in there.
Yeah,
I don't think he's a number 9. He's a forward player, but he's certainly not a number 9.
Yeah, and it's I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? Because then we can draw parallels with the Richie Wellens championship winning season, and the partnership of Jerry Yates and Owen Doyle really was something. Because the thing that I always loved about the pair of them was that you could always, if you subbed off one of them, the other could quite seamlessly slip in and play that number 9 position as well. And as that season progressed, I think we all really appreciated the brilliance of Jerry Yates and the flexibility of Jerry Yates. Like he could play off of Doyle, but he could also play that position. And of course, later in the season, we had Hallam Hope come in as an option off the bench when we maybe needed it. and I thought that they were all used really effectively in that role. But yeah, I mean, Andrew, I'll take your view on this if you don't mind. I think it really has been like one of the key positions we struggled in this year.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the two sort of starters, Simpson and Davison, have stayed fit and produced between them a good haul of goals, but it is that sort of lack of options behind them. I think when you were sort of looking down the squad for most areas, if you thought one person could get injured, you'd just about see enough of a replacement. But when you had no Simpson or no Davison, it would really kind of you can only imagine what a fundamental difference it would make to how the team plays. But I think that we should sort of push us too far ahead to next season. Finding sort of strikers and recruiting strikers is going to be a big part of what's going to make the team effective. Whether they will, sort of find another physical type who can do that job, whether they'll want that, or whether they will try and look at playing in a slightly different way.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, let's also be very, very clear. I'm a huge fan of Josh Davison. Yeah, he's got his detractors. The guy is still very, very young, very, very eager. Lots of willing, lots of hustle and bustle. Certainly, blood, sweat, and tears for the shirt. I think if he had played a full season with us, I think he would have probably gone on and got 20 goals. As I do think Tyree Simpson would have gone and get 20 goals. But what I'm talking about is in circumstances that we had last night where it wasn't quite clicking, to have another option to come off the bench and just give the defence something to worry about, Chris. I think that's more my point. I think that's the kind of, pretty much what all three of us are getting at, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. And it's been like that. I think we've probably been lucky through the season because when we had Simpson and when we've had Davison, if one of them had got injured when Davison first came in, it was a little bit of a niggly injury there. But if one of them had an injury that kept them out for a few games, we would have struggled because they're so key to how we play, and there's no one else who could have played that role.
Yeah.
And I think that some of the criticism that Davison's got on social media today has been well over the top.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'll tell you, it baffles me because the boys are all on social media, and whilst they won't necessarily come out and admit it, they all do pay attention to the comments, and I struggle. I understand there's a certain cathartic. That's the whole reason social media is there. I understand there's a certain sort of cathartic rant that people want to have, particularly off the back of what could have been season. And I think obviously everyone had set their hearts on a trip to Wembley. It would have been a lovely way to end the season. But I mean, it just baffles me. By all means, like we're saying now, yeah, Josh didn't have his best game, but we are talking about a guy that's got a lot of great goals for Swindon this year and has really sweated blood for the shirt. I can't understand what you think you're going to get out of, just unleashing your wrath in the way that some people have. And I'll just say, just as Vic Morgan would say, just ask yourself before you hit that return button or before you scream something from the stands, just ask yourself, what is it you're trying to achieve? Yeah. I just don't get it. But anyway, okay, so we've obviously running through the lineup.
One thing I wanted to say as well about Davison there as well. I think probably out of everyone in this league, Port Vale might be the hardest team for Davison to play against.
Mm.
It'll be a lot more effective against a less physical team because not everyone plays like Port Vale do, and he's been very effective since he's come in.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'll tell you, I'll say this for nothing, Chris. As far as I'm aware, his contract's up in the summer, but Charlton Athletic have an option on that.
They've taken the option. Charlton have taken the option on him.
And not surprising at all. I live very, very close to Charlton Athletic. I live around and amongst a lot of Charlton Athletic supporters, much to my frustration and annoyance, as they like to remind me. But they're none of them are particularly confident that that Josh Davison will go back to the Valley and have an impact, or that they believe that he's part of the plans. And I think taking up the option is purely a question of getting a transfer fee for him.
Yeah, I think it's exactly the same as what Ipswich did with Simpson. No intention of playing him. They just want to make sure they get a fee because they'll get. Actually, Charlton wouldn't get a fee probably for Davison anyway because he's not come through their system.
Yep.
But it's purely about the fee.
Yeah, I completely agree. So here's a question for you guys then, Chris. Do you sign him, yes or no?
Well, how much are they asking? And is Simpson an option? I think it's one or the other.
That's a little bit of a mercurial get out, Mr. Phillips. Get the splinters out of your bum, and do you sign him?
Do I have to say yes or no?
Yeah, of course you do.
I would. Oh, this is a tough one. I would say no on the hope that we can bring Simpson because I prefer Simpson. Okay. So I would say no.
Andrew, do you think that there is a legitimate interest or concrete interest in signing him? And if even if you don't know, would you sign him on the basis of what you've seen?
I'm sure what sort of fee Charlton would ask for would have an impact, no doubt. Do I sign him? I'm leaning on the no side. I think I'm with Chris that I think if I had a straight shot between Simpson or Davison and you were paying a roughly similar fee, then Simpson has advantages in terms of, I think, what we've seen on the pitch and, of course, in terms of age and development potential.
So I'm going to round off our trio by saying I 100% would sign him on the basis that I don't think we would have to pay a king's ransom for him. I think there would be other takers, but I think if the choice was his, I think he would want to stay at Swindon. I think he's very at home at Swindon. I think he's very at home with his teammates. I appreciate there will be some change in the summer inevitably, but I think we'll still keep the core of our squad together. And I think under the same premise, I would be looking to sign them both. And I think from a business point of view, I think they're in terms of their age and in terms of the money that we would put down for them, and I think the number of goals they would score, I think they would only become saleable assets because I think they would both score enough goals. I think they could play together because I don't think either of them are an orthodox number 9, but I think they can both play that role. But I also think they can both play as a 10. So personally, I think if you think about swapping and changing of strikers during games, all the things we talked about, if there's a game where you may be chasing it in the last 10 minutes and you need a couple of guys that are going to cause absolute havoc against a resolute backline that Port Vale had last night, for example, I think I would want both of them in my squad. And I think actually Simpson would probably be, because of his age and the way that he's come through, he would probably be the biggest financial concern in a tribunal ruling against us. But hey, listen, that's just my take. But listen, Andrew, I'm really interested in your thoughts on this because before the game, I had said, and indeed in our show last week, I kind of said, look, I think it's imperative that we get on the ball, we impose our style of play, we don't concede early, we keep things nice and tight, and we really have a good go at them. And obviously, lo and behold, 8 minutes have gone, ball across the box, and James Williams taps in for 1-0. What was going through your mind at that stage?
I think it had the potential to be a long night. It was sort of fairly. It kind of felt evident fairly early. I think it's a little later into the commentary after that we were gradually saying that all the things we'd thought or predicted about the game turned out not to be the case. The use of the sort of wide open pitch, being able to play round and play through Vale as that didn't really happen as well. I even wondered whether Vale might actually be cagier at the start than we thought because they only needed 1 goal and they had 90 minutes to get it. But Wilson obviously missed that extraordinary chance in the first kind of couple of minutes, and that they didn't learn from it. So I can't say exactly felt like a goal was coming, but it was just clear very early on that the side we kind of thought and hoped and perhaps expected might turn up hadn't quite done so.
No, the thing with that, I was going to say, the thing with that as well is over the 2 games, Wilson had 3 identical chances, 2 of which he scored and 1 of which he should have scored. But Howard didn't learn from that or whatnot, because it was the same thing all 3 times.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, yeah, very, very, very. I mean, it was interesting, wasn't it? I mean, that phrase you're using, guys, about particularly you, Chris, about learning from mistakes. It was it could have been. I mean, it could have been an absolute horror show. After 10 minutes, really quite easily. How I still cannot fathom how James Wilson didn't polish that chance off at the back stick. But I mean, but equally, we talk about other turning points in the game. Now, it's always easy to say, scream handball when a ball goes into the box from one end of the pitch to the other. And you kind of think at the back of your mind, oh, did I really just see a handball there? But I just want to talk about Manny Egbo's cross into the box. That was quite clearly handled. I mean, from my vantage, I was right down the other end of the pitch, but from my vantage point, it was so blatant. And what was frustrating the hell out of me in relation to last night's game was that I'd listened to some national radio coverage about referees that have been selected for these legs of the playoffs, and I was hoping that we'd kind of ended up picking the cream of what I think this year has been a bad lot. But I mean, Andrew, how was it from your vantage point? Because it was as clear as day to me. I mean, I'm going to guess it was clear as day for you, and you must have been as frustrated.
Yeah, no. I think the instinct was it was very much looked like sort of a handball from the, as much as we can judge from the distance. Yeah. I think, and the reaction of the players is not always definitive, but it was sort of very strong immediately afterwards. So when you kind of add up what you think your eyes have taken in that once with the reaction of the players, and having seen the photo of it now, that's clearly one that got away from the officials for whatever reason.
Yeah, and it kind of felt, I mean, I don't know how you feel about this, Chris, but it kind of, at that point in time, and this is where I think maybe we as a supporter base, myself included, have got to be better. But there seemed to be a real lull amongst the Swindon support at that point in time, where I heard a lot of people just turning to each other saying, that's the most Swindon town, like rub of the green. And it really seemed to psychologically affect us at that point. We'd got off to a roaring start. The first 5 minutes, the crowd was lovely and loud, but there was a good old lull. Now, again, maybe that was just my positioning in the stands, but I'm pretty, I had a long old drive home with guys that were dotted around that stand, and they were all of the opinion that it seemed to sort of like, it just reminds us of the whole 30 years of hurt that Swindon have been enduring more often than not, and all the conversations come out about old scars, and you're hearing things like the most Swindon-y of things to happen. We've somehow got to shrug off that malaise and try and help the boys beyond those sort of setbacks, have we not?
Yeah, we have as well. But it's like I say, this that's the most Swindon thing is probably a phrase that everyone should use. I was actually going back to the referee in there, speaking to Hannah Clinch earlier on Twitter about the officiating, because I actually thought across all 4 games that the officiating was shocking. And but one thing, I can't remember who I was speaking to the other week. It might have even been Jay, and was saying that there's no championship on, so why aren't championship referees or championship officials doing these important games?
Yeah, I completely agree. You're listen, there has to, for me, and I'm not just saying this off the back of end of season frustrations. What I'm saying this is over the course of a season where I've certainly hardly missed a home game this season and a good smattering of away games. I come away from most games, and the pragmatist in my head has historically always gone, it's rub of the green. What you end up losing out on in one game, it always makes up for itself at the end of the season if you're of a sufficient quality. We'll get the luck will change, blah blah blah. But I've been coming away from games this season with a real sense of injustice, and seeing some decisions where I'm like, how have you missed that? And the thing that frustrates me about last night is that games of that magnitude, where you're talking about the financial returns of playing at Wembley. They're saying they're going to use VAR in the final, but yet they're not willing to do something as simple as just install a monitor for a referee to go and check decision. I'm not talking about installing full goal line technology, but surely games of that magnitude, where you've got so much riding on them, you've got to at least give these referees that quite clearly aren't up to scratch an opportunity to go and review some of these decisions, because there is no way if a referee goes and looks at that decision on a monitor, he doesn't change his mind.
The other thing as well with you about VAR, I think, and I've mentioned this more than once, that VAR is a big reason why we've had these shocking officials, because with VAR, the Championship referees have then been bumped up to the Premier League because they need more because of VAR. So then referees from the lower level are being bumped up. So effectively, we've got non-league referees in League Two because everyone's been moved up a level because of VAR.
Yeah, I get it. And listen, you're not going to find a bigger critic of VAR. I don't want VAR in our game. But what I'm trying to say is, look, if you're going to have it in the final, then surely you've got to have it in the semis. Like, you just have to, because the stakes are so high. You're playing under enormous pressure, where the stakes are high, where I even heard on a commentary for the League One playoffs, the commentary team referring to the fact that the last 15 minutes of all playoff games are so crucial, because everyone's playing like with, essentially, it's to put it politely, everyone's just putting bombs into the box. You've got 6-7 men being thrown up top. The pressure's on. It matters to everybody. So if they're aware of the importance of these games and the conditions these guys are playing under, then help the referees, because you're saying you're going to do it in the final, so do it in the semis. But let's just be clear.
That might come down to with the VAR. Obviously, VAR is set up at Wembley, but how much would it cost to put into a ground for one game?
Yeah, well, to my point, Chris, right? I actually don't like the creep of technology into our game at all, right? I really, really don't. But I am all for, how difficult can it be for a monitor to be rigged up into a stadium that enable, I mean, not being funny, if GIF can achieve it for us, within, a couple of minutes of a goal, then surely there must be ample technology for a big decision like that, and some sort of system where people can go, hold on a sec, like, you've got it now. But let's just be clear, I don't want that technology in our game at all. It's just the fact that, if you're going to say you're going to give teams the opportunity to have wrongs righted at Wembley, then you should be doing it for the semis. Again, I'm not looking for excuses. It is one of those. It's unfortunate, but it's just an irritation, and it is such a clear and obvious error that he's made there as well. I mean, the guy's arm was raised above his head in an unnatural position. The ball's hit his hand, and it's lost all its momentum, and it's denied us a goal scoring opportunity.
I don't even think that's on the referee. For me, that's on, how do I say it? That's on the assistant referee.
The assistant,
because it's right in front of her. I don't know how to miss it. She's looking straight at it. Does she not want to make a decision because the referee is there? I don't see how she's got to flag that. If the referee hasn't given it, she's got to flag it. Yeah,
and ultimately she's missed it. And indeed, so has the referee. Fundamentally, what it tells you is, again, I'm sure it will come out in their reviews, because their games are all reviewed, and you're going to have a very apologetic referee and assistant referee, hopefully writing letters of apology and having their performance scrutinised, because that's kind of what needs to happen. Well, obviously, we kind of all know what happens. I mean, an outstanding save from Lewis Ward right on the whistle. The game at the end of extra time, game goes into penalties. We give ourselves a position where we're 2 penalties to the good, Andrew. I mean, at that stage, what was the vibe in the commentary box, Andrew? 2 penalties to the good. It was all looking so rosy, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm afraid I'm always cautious till the team comes over the line, and there is. I don't know if this is a phenomenon or whether this is just one of those like human things that you tend to notice because it seems counterintuitive, but it always seems happens that the team that takes the early advantage or gets the first save in a shootout is the one that goes on to lose. I think beforehand, we had Steve Hale in the box, obviously, as worked closely with Lewis Ward as a goalkeeping coach at his clubs, and I think we were always confident that Lewis would have a decent chance of saving one or two of them, and then it's really down really down to the strikers to convert.
Yeah. Well, look, what we'll try and do, we've got a couple of other guys who are quite keen to come on and say their piece at this stage. And Daz, hopefully, Daz, if you could unmute yourself. Daz Smith, I'm really interested in hearing where Daz's head was at as we entered the penalty shootout. Daz, are you able to join us? You just need to click unmute your mic.
Yep.
Good evening, Daz. Welcome to the Tom Broadbent Lounge for your show debut. How are you, buddy?
Better.
You're slowly recovering, are you, pal?
Yeah, it was, like every other town fan, sad, disappointed, gutted, and at work.
What's
So,
Daz? Daz, where was your brain at? 2 penalties to the good. Were you feeling fairly motivated at that stage?
Well, I was listening to the match on the radio at work.
Yeah.
And I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank Andrew Halls for all the commentary throughout the season, because I do enjoy his commentary. And I was listening on the radio, and when we got the second penalty saved by Wardy, I was all beside myself, ran into the crew room where one of the guys was watching it on his mobile phone and said, "Oh, it's a minute behind." I thought, all right. I said, I can't listen. I've got to listen. I can't listen. I've got to listen. So I went back in, and then when Josh Davison went to take his penalty, and I just believed that he'd scored. So I come running back into the crew room, shouting and hollering, "Yes, yes!" And then watched the penalty on my mate's mobile, only to see him miss. And I thought, no, I said, that's it. And this thing about, well, that's a really Swindon thing, and that was Swindon thing. I've been supporting them since the 70s, and that was a Swindon thing.
And I'll tell you, Daz, the sad thing as well, I really felt for Josh, because certainly amongst the squad, Josh takes a cracking penalty, and he's one of the lads you would have absolutely bet your mortgage on him burying. And it was a decent. I mean, it was an all right penalty, decent enough save. But fundamentally, there's that term again. I mean, I'll bring Daz, if you don't mind. I'm gonna bring James on as well at this stage.
Okay.
James Burgoyne, welcome to the show this evening, buddy. Where was your head at, pal, in relation to obviously 2 penalties up at that stage? Like me, I'm hoping you were kind of, you were frothing, as I like to say.
Yeah, it was a weird one for me. So I had to, because I was in Wolverhampton, I had to leave the game early because I'd work early in the morning, and I was luckily managed to get an Uber just back to Stoke Station time for the penalty shootout, and I just hit it on iFollow, and it was just absolute agony listening to it and not being on the ground, and just kind of, I think my feed was a bit behind, and seeing kind of Port Vale fans on the other side of the platform going back to God knows Stafford or whatever, and it was just an absolute sucker punch when all seeing everyone else celebrating, just being the only town fan there. Really, it was just an absolute kick in the teeth. But we've been through this stuff before. We'll go again next season, I guess. That's the only way, really.
I think we were. I mean, how I don't. It's a lottery, isn't it? At the end of the day, I've seen Town take penalties under extreme pressure, where people that you don't believe they're going to be able to bury them. And I'll mention some names to you. You'll remember the Charlton shootout, James, where I remember Kevin Amankwa stepping up, and I'm thinking, I can't imagine Kevin just doesn't. He's not got the feel of a penalty taker about him. Yeah, he's a big, solid, kind of gangly fullback. But at the end of the day, it's just about putting the ball in from 12 yards. So, but all the weird things that go through your mind when the various players are stepping up to take penalties, I didn't have any real concerns with any of. I didn't have any of those thoughts as our guys were stepping up to take the penalties. I think I genuinely felt that Ellis, Josh, and Harry all had it in them to hit the back of the net, and so it was just sort of. I don't know. It's even hard for us to kind of. It's hard for me to sort of bring this to life as a topic of conversation, because the run-ups all look solid. I mean, was there anything you saw, James, that made you think, he's going to miss this?
Okay, I didn't actually. Oh, I kind of had it on kind of iFollow Sky and stuff, and
Oh, so you were
it was
listening as opposed to
just
watching the iFollow feed?
yeah. So I kind of watched them afterwards, but it is a lot, isn't it? Penalties. That's when you can really look at it. I mean, the only one who really has proper kind of it's just no one knows what they're doing unless it's in the moment. I mean, I suppose.
And they've
I
all
mean,
been
it's like as a
practicing.
keeper.
And they'd all been practicing, James, as well, haven't they? This is the thing, like, Ben Garner have made it very clear they've all been practicing. I know that I heard some comments about people saying, well, Ellis took a penalty, with the crowd behind him at the county ground and he missed it and it wasn't a great penalty earlier, a few weeks ago, and people were, but I mean, none of that matters. Like, it doesn't, it genuinely has very, very little bearing in my mind. It just comes down to, the luck of stepping up, striking, picking your spot, striking it and just hoping for the best. It's you can't turn around and start criticizing someone. You can't make an ability criticism at that stage. Like it literally just comes down to nerve, does it not?
Well, yeah. So I mean, it's more than the ability, isn't it? Because it is a strike from 12 yards, isn't it? Like I think it is. The whole idea of it is about the mental side of it. I think.
The thing that they were about the run-ups. McCurdy's run-up was a bit different. I didn't think he didn't look confident with that run-up.
No, I think you're right. I think, but that's all part of it. I think run-up is one of those things. I think you see a lot, certainly with penalty takers and stuff. You have to do what you're comfortable with. If it's a two-step run-up, that's the one you have to do. I think you see a lot of, I know, you have like frankly great penalty takers. Like, I mean, even like Jorginho, his run-up's a bit of a theatrical one, but if it works in, it's kind of the thing that you're kind of used to. That's the thing you have to go with. So I think a lot is made over that kind of stuff, and I get it in terms of positioning of foot and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you just have to know what you're comfortable with because that's the only thing that really matters.
James, I'll tell you what. I mean, if there is one thing that I would say about about penalties, and it's always easy, the day after when it's not gone your way, that you can make these kind of judgments and criticisms, but I would like to think all of those lads have got a routine, and that all of those guys, right, irrespective, would take time in their training day to work out a penalty routine that works for them. And by that I mean the best penalty of all of them last night by a country mile was our natural penalty taker, Jack Payne's penalty. It was exactly the same approach, exactly the same run up. He had everything about that penalty was like, this guy's going to break the net, as so it proved. Now, that would be my only outtake. I would be interested to know how much the guys practice penalties, but not from a point of view that, because listen, at the end of the day, they've got enough to fill their days with in terms of perfecting their own positioning, etc. The chances of a penalty shootout right at the end of a season is probably something that's very easy to just park. But I will say this: the reason the point I'm trying to make is, I very lucky a few years ago to go and spend a period of time out in Italy, watching youth football and youth development. And what's very interesting out there in the and I think I was told it's rolled out across all of their youth systems. Every single game, regardless of result, ends in a penalty shootout where every one of the kids takes a penalty. And I remember thinking that's very, very unusual. It's very odd. But nonetheless, as my friend pointed out to me at the time, he said, we're very proficient, Italy, at taking penalties, aren't we? Now, all right, you could argue USA 94 and all the rest of it. However, it's a good point, isn't it? Because you don't see a lot of that in youth football in the UK. And you do tend to find conversations about penalty taking only tends to come out, and the media only tend to ask that question when we're starting to get towards the business end of the season.
It's an interesting point you make there, Hannah, because I spent a bit of time in Canada near Halifax and went to a lot of pre-season games there. And so what they do is that they played a game, and then after the game they have a shootout.
Yeah.
So that they practice that, because obviously if the score's a level in hockey, you finish it with a shootout. The other thing I wanted to say was there a tattoo riding on Ellis's penalty?
Yeah, there absolutely was. And do you notice there's somebody missing out of our listener list tonight, Chris? He's at home, kind of obviously commiserating, but at the same time celebrating the fact that he's got away with it this year.
Yeah.
And I might add, there was also I'm also a beneficiary of penalties last night. Because any eagle-eyed listeners to the show will remember that I had a bet riding with a certain Mr. Caddis that should we have got promoted, because Paul was absolutely certain we're going up this year, that I would be getting Paul Caddis's face tattooed on my posterior at the end of the season. And all I'm going to say is this. I'm going to be very, very interested as to whether or not Paul comes good in terms of having hashtag the Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge tattooed on his bottom cheek. And I think with a little bit of social media, pressure, we can probably see that happen, because Tom Broadbent was in the stands with us for the first leg. And Tom absolutely said that he's going to be putting pressure on from his end because he thinks it's the right thing to do. So, Mr. Caddis, if you're listening, and even if you're not listening and you're listening in later down the line, I'm coming for you. That's all I'm willing to say. Okay, so listen, there's a bit of an elephant in the room, and I kind of sense that we're going to get a lot of people wanting to come on and talk about, what happened after the penalty shootout, because I think we've kind of done the penalties to death in that respect. But before we do that, I just got to stress that, there is a certain legal responsibility on our shoulders to make sure that we are not affecting what is now a live police investigation. But nonetheless, we will be talking about the signposting that's gone out today. And we will be urging people, if they've got information, evidence, images, etc., we're going to make sure that they get signposted in the right directions. But I've just got to make that very, very clear, guys. We cannot jaundice and affect an ongoing police investigation. And if I sense the conversation starts going down that road, then quite clearly we're not going to be able to sort of go into the sort of depth that maybe some people want to go into. But couple of new faces have joined us. Max, if you unmute your mic, mate, please feel free to join us tonight if you can. Max Springer, if you are listening. How are you, Max? Good evening. Welcome to the Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge, buddy. It's your debut on the show. How are you?
Hi, Hannah. It's nice to be on. Yeah, just been a long day at work, not really getting a lot done. But
suffering like we all are.
Yeah, just one of those. It's the first time. So it's the first time that I've actually seen Town in extra time and penalties in person.
Yeah.
As well. So that was a new experience seeing that in person, and yeah, just gutted.
Yeah,
gutted. I'm gutted for Ellis, especially of all of them.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, and I'll tell you why. Not only is Ellis a really, really good guy, obviously all of Ellis's family were present. Ellis, for me, after a kind of an indifferent start to the season at left back, as we've spoken about, and nonetheless, obviously we've been talking about, certain sort of jokey tattoos and whatnot that we had agreed with young Tyler. Ellis's season had really blossomed, and Ellis had got to a stage where he won both our listeners award and our panels award at the Tom Broadbent Lounge for most improved player this year. And the context behind that was that Ellis's transformation into a left-sided centre midfielder was absolutely outstanding as we started entering the business end of our season. And it was really pleasing to see, because Ellis is obviously our longest serving pro. But also Ellis is a bloody good technical footballer.
He's a properly tidy player, especially the second half of the season. He's been one of the ones you can just depend on, and it's been nice to see him have a relatively injury-free season as well, and he's shown us what he can do.
Yeah,
and it's been so good to see, because it was saying, I remember I was actually at Port Vale the day when he had his leg broke a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
and it was a similar thing then that he had. That was his first really, really good run in the team that got disrupted. Yeah. But I know, is he contracted for next year, Ellis?
I believe.
Yes, he is. I believe.
So that's and hopefully he can just carry on straight from where he's left off. I'm just gutted for him in the way that, because he was solid in the actual game. I don't think he put much of a foot wrong, especially in the first half when we were under the cosh. He got the ball a couple of times and drove into their box and really produced some good chances for us as well.
Yeah. He was asking questions in a way that, Manny Egbo seemed to be uncharacteristically off form a little last night at certain points. He was certainly one of our most progressive players. So yeah, I mean, it was really hard on Ellis last night. Really, really wretched luck. I mean, if you're going to be super critical, I'm never really a fan of. Obviously, every player takes them, and Vale hit a couple of Mal Benning's penalties straight into the top corner in particular. I remember thinking, under pressure, that is a solid penalty. But both Harry and Ellis opted to go for top bins, and it didn't quite work for them at the time. Again, listen, we can sit and criticise it all you like. There are, and they won't sort of, they won't criticise me for saying this. There are much better, greater world-class players that have done exactly the same thing under pressure. Roberto Baggio, Chris Waddle, two names that immediately spring to light. So if they felt comfortable going high with the penalties, good luck to them. Unfortunately, on the night, it just kind of wasn't quite to be. But well, look,
I mean, it's also worth. Oh, sorry to interject. It's also kind of worth saying our last kind of big playoff penalty shootout at Brentford kind of sprang to mind when I was kind of thinking about kind of the reaction setting to Ellis and Harry in terms of when you think about the scenes, the very kind of public scenes of what happened with Miles' story when you had like Alan McCormack, like massive senior players behind them who didn't have the bottle to go up and take one, and at least all of those kind of top pros, everyone there stood up yesterday. Yep. There wasn't anyone who was kind of cowering. So I think if you gave us at the start of the season, okay, I don't want to go too much about like, oh, what happened last summer and all that kind of stuff, because in that kind of 90 minutes, it kind of doesn't matter to an extent. But, if you gave us at the start of the season a penalty shootout away from Wembley, you take that. So I think anyone who looks at the season as a failure because of last night is a moron, because this has been a fantastic season for this football club that has probably revitalised it from a potential death now. So,
yeah, well, James, I think we first met and spoke properly on the train to that Melksham game in pre-season when I remember mentioning this could be the last Swindon game I watch on that day. So to come from where we are. Yeah, it's just the way it's ended, isn't it? I think that's why there's been so much outbursts, and there's always going to be outbursts in a big loss like this. But I think just the way it happened.
Yeah, I mean, listen,
Max, they all had the perfect game plan. They pressed us to death, and it nullified us completely, especially in the first 20, 25 minutes as well.
Yeah, I mean. Listen, Max, you both make absolutely like solid points, and a couple of them like we really should sort of spend a bit of time just picking apart. I mean, Andrew, I'll bring you in at this point, talking about the fact that, I mean, James raises that point about all of our senior pros stepped up last night, didn't they? That was a very, whilst the end point was and there were certainly echoes of the Brentford playoff. You've got to give every single one of those lads like full backing and support off the back of that game last night for having the bottle to step up and take it and not not be the shrinking violet.
Yeah, I think when you sort of look down the initial five, there's no, there was no one who you thought, oh, I'd expect them to see them take one who didn't come forward and take one. So you kind of look at that positive, and then of course, once you're down to 6, 7, or 8, you are inevitably working your way down the list, because you think the only two outfield players who didn't take a penalty were Matthew Baudry, who missed one in a playoff final for Orient, and therefore probably has some scars with that, and Jake O'Brien, who you put in the sort of Kevin Amankwah players you wouldn't expect to see and take a penalty and scored. So everyone has kind of stepped up in turn really when their duty called, and that. I mean, just going back a little bit, I think, as you said, for most of them, the sort of process and the run up all looked fine, with McCurdy being the exception. Whether it's just his style or not, he did look a little bit like he wanted it to be over as quickly as possible. But the rest of them, the sort of fairly methodical way they seem to approach it, I don't think you can have any complaints about.
No. Right, okay. I mean, I mentioned, let's leave. I think we move on from the penalties now, and I'm just going to start the next segment by reading something that just made me feel sick to my stomach, essentially. And I could have picked any one of the tweets, but I have asked, and I completely understand why Phil hasn't necessarily been keen to sort of come on and actually bring this topic to life, because it's very, very personal thought that he put out there, but. Phil Reed, father of Louis Reed, said the following today around lunchtime. I can honestly say that in the 8 years Louis has been a professional, last night was the first time I feared for my son's safety on a football pitch. This has to stop. The football authorities and the police need to stamp down on it hard. Now, as I left the carnage, as I'm going to call it, unfolded last night, I'm going to tell you my personal story just to sort of add a layer to this and why I maybe at first missed what was going on with the players and such like. I was, and I say roped in, and I mean that with great affection. I was roped into helping the Great Western Reds last night with their tifos and their flags, and it was with immense pleasure that I did that. And I'll tell you why it gave me immense pleasure. You don't necessarily get to appreciate the positivity and the "this has made my day" factor that handing a flag, a giant flag, to a young kid around the age of 7, 8, 9, 10 years old actually has. And it really hit me last night as I was passing these giant flags along the front row of the away end and seeing these young kids' faces absolutely light up and the pride on their faces. As a father myself, I don't mean to get overly emotional about it, but as a father myself, I absolutely loved every second of seeing these kids' faces light up. And then the comments from their parents, oh, what a wonderful thing to be able to do. Jay Collett got enormous amounts of credit from a whole host of people around the front of the stand yesterday. The Great Western Reds have their detractors. I still can't understand why, but some people like to give them a bit of a boot. I think personally you need to give your head a wobble if you do, because I've seen nothing but positivity and atmosphere from what they've done this year, and none more so than last night. So you can imagine, as the final whistle goes, I'm stood there essentially in a state of shock. I had my hands in my pockets. My shoulders were a bit shrugged. I looked at the players. I was a bit crestfallen, but I was pretty emotionless. And I would say no more than 10, 15 seconds later, no more than 15, 20 feet from me, there was a lineup of, I would say, a good 10 or so local fans, and I don't want to call them fans. I hope they don't represent Port Vale in any way, but they came out of the home end, and I had everything from people grabbing their groins in my and sort of gesturing in my direction. I had, and I might hasten to add, I had males, I had females, all making obscene gestures in my direction. Baiting the crowd in a way that was only ever going to get or designed to get some form of negative reaction from supporters of Swindon Town Football Club. Now, let me just go back to the point about flags. All right. Those flags were all in the hands of youngsters. I looked to my left, I looked to my right as the baiting started. All those kids were still there and their parents were desperately trying to usher those kids away. I started fearing the worst at that stage because I thought, right, I hope these kids can get to the back of the stand and out as quickly as possible as the bottles started raining in to the town end. And then the little glistening that are coins going flying in, into the town fans, not the town end, the coins and all kinds of debris. And I had bottles whizzing past my head. I will point out that the bottles did seem to be getting returned with interest from some sort of sections of the Swindon crowd as well, from what I could see, because unless they've suddenly developed boomerang characteristics, they were certainly being thrown back. And then what you ended up having was this ridiculous game of let's see who could luzz the bottle at each other hard enough. Much to my absolute disgust, Junior Autism and Junior Autism's parents, I'm sure they have a role with Junior's account, then told a story today about having to essentially cower away from debris being sent into the Swindon fans. And it just seemed to get progressively worse. The 10, 15 suddenly turned into 20 odd people. And the town fans were then urging the stewards to take action. It seemed to me that it's so dynamic. I was trying to take shelter at one point from objects that were being thrown in. But then there was this curious exchange between me and this chap that stood in front of me with what looked like his female partner. The chap had, how could I describe it? This guy must have been in his late 50s, early 60s. He was wearing a Port Vale shirt. He was wearing a pair of jeans. And the chap was deliberately trying to provoke a reaction from me. And I know that because he was stood there and he was looking directly at me. He was pointing directly at me and he was trying to elicit a response. My response to him was to essentially to stand there to the point where I knew I'd made eye contact, and I just mouthed at him, "Grow up." Now, what I saw from him was quite something, because he suddenly went from being in an absolute red-faced rage to almost like finding himself again. At which point he seemed to grab his female partner, turn around and walk off. Now, I'm not trying to say that there was restraint on my part or whatever, but I just think it opens a window on so much of what was going on last night, the things I've just said. And I mean, at this point, I'd like to, bring one of you guys in for your thoughts. Alex, were you at the game last night? And if so, did you see similar things to me?
Yeah, I was at the game. Obviously, you probably tell my voice is pretty much gone. I'm just having a couple of Budweisers to try and get it back. But absolute disgrace. I mean, I've had a couple of, again, I've got to be quite careful on social media, but I've had a couple of arguments, none more than the famous Johnny Wilkes, and he's sort of on there condoning, not condoning and whatever about the fans, but they're sort of talking about a minority. I mean, to me, there was hundreds of them goading, gesturing, mouthing off, and like you say, it's the small kids who are going to be scarred from that. Bottle sort of just brushed past me, hit a girl behind me. She must have been in her teens, hit her square in the face, and she started crying. It was just an awful end to an awful day, really. And I say that, as much as you can kind of enjoy one of those days, it was just awful. Personally, for me, it starts with the student and the police. We were like one of the last ones out, and it was only at that point the police started forcing them back. Why aren't they in there and forcing them back straight away? They had probably 5-6 minutes. It probably seemed like a lot longer, but maybe 5-6 minutes of being able just to do what they want to us without any, reprimand from anyone. It's just disgraceful behaviour, really.
I mean, the one thing that I will say, and I did look around, and there were people that were producing their mobile phones and recording a lot of this. That is, potential evidence. And Staffordshire Police and Wiltshire Police are coordinating an investigation now, and are urging supporters with anything on their mobile phones or any other observations to contact Staffordshire Police by dialing 101. Which is the non-emergency line that you use to call the police, for those of you that don't know. And I believe that is incident reference 231 of the 19th. So incident 231 of the 19th. And share what you've got. Because, these people, Port Vale as a club, have come in for a lot of criticism today from large quarters of Swindon Town because of obviously things that had unfolded. But let's remember, Port Vale are a club. What happened yesterday was ultimately meted out by individuals, and those individuals are a stain on that club and a stain on that club's reputation. Those individuals need to be identified. Those individuals need to be banned, and those individuals need to realise that those scenes are not welcome at football grounds. Now, it's a real shame for me because I'd gone through a wonderful period of football supporting where I thought that we'd dealt with racism in football. I felt that we'd dealt with hooliganism in football. I thought that all these things were on the decline, had been dealt with. That all the good work that Let's Kick It Out had undertaken, and all these organisations that have done so much good to educate people in football. And then there was talk of this sort of stuff creeping back into the game, and I was thinking, look, how bad can it be? Is this just, rightly so, let's not be complacent. Is this just over diligence? But the scenes that I saw last night were some of the worst scenes that I have seen at a football match live. And it breaks my heart to see a lovely kid like Junior Autism, who has been posting the most wonderful sort of warm-hearted stuff on social media, really opening our kind of the supporter experience to a whole new audience of youngsters, particularly youngsters with vulnerabilities. Why should that young man be posting stuff about avoiding missiles at a football game? We're talking about a kid that's 10 years old at best. I mean, that's outrageous, Alex, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'd go back to as well, and I mean, a couple of the lads that are listening will have heard my thoughts about Darryl Clark yesterday, even before he got sent off. I mean, the bloke's had some, terrible news happen to him. It doesn't matter. We've all got. I sent a tweet out earlier. We've all had grief in our lives, and it doesn't make you have to behave in a certain way. But his behaviour on that touchline, home and away, that home tie the amount of grief them three lads, is it Dean Whitehead, Darryl Clark and Crosby, I think, the amount of grief that fourth official got, you know, the verbal abuse he was getting home and away. Darryl Clark's running on the pitch, then he does what he does to Dion. You know, it stems from the top. What sort of, you know, what is he, you know, I can't find the word, sorry, but the fans are looking at him and, you know, he's trying to punch Dion, you know, headbutt Dion. You know, he's geeing up the fans and, you know, fine, gee up the fans in one way. But, you know, you've got to look at yourself as a management team. What are you, you know, as a role model to young kids? They're looking at them going, oh, it's all right for our manager to go and, you know, get stuck into Dion. Oh, we'll run over there and get stuck into the Swindon fans. Am I right or wrong with that? I'm not sure, but he was a disgrace for me.
Well, I was going to interject on that. Like, it just contributed to the hostile atmosphere there was from pretty much as soon as I walked into the ground. I mean, so I live up north, so I pretty much exclusively go to away games, and I've never felt so uncomfortable and especially obviously at the end unsafe at an away game. And I think like a big part of that was like your manager can set the tone if he's acting like that.
I think it's all three of them, though. That's the thing. It's all three of them are like it. And you see them getting at the fourth official. You know, I'm on the pitch before games, and even when they were warming up on the home leg, you know, they're not the nicest of people. They don't say hello to you. They sort of, you know, look down at you and sort of, you know, from that, you know, you always can tell what you know what these people are like when you get on the pitch and you know they ask you where you want them, you know, where do you want us to warm up, and you know, most teams are absolutely sound. You'll have a conversation on the pitch with them, but then Port Vale lot, top to bottom, I think they're in the same league as Bristol Rovers and Oxford to me now.
Well, okay. So listen, I mean, I think, listen, a couple of interesting points in relation to sort of setting the tone, all right? And I had an interesting exchange, and it wasn't a hostile exchange, but with a town fan earlier today, where you know, he used the terms, you know, basically like young kids, essentially. I'm trying to remember it verbatim, but it was something along the lines of, you know, these young kids turning up, wannabe hooligans, you know, acting like this, acting like that, and my point was, well, look, I think it's wrong to just sort of label this as an issue with, you know, sort of mid-teens dressing up in Stone Island, drinking booze, taking drugs, and then going to football. I think that was what was kind of. I'm not going to put it to that chap's sort of tweet itself, but that was kind of what's being alluded to here. What I saw was a lot of guys that were actually my age or older behaving like that, and these guys weren't wearing the kind of typical kind of garments that you associate with people that cause trouble at football. These guys were wearing replica shirts. They were dressed just like I was at the game. They had clearly just got well beyond themselves, and they were acting in a manner where I just stood there thinking, like, what would your boss think if you were acting like that? What would your kids at home think if you were acting like that? And here is my point. The younger lads that are coming through, and lasses, because it wasn't just guys that were doing this yesterday. There was one particular female that it was like she was completely possessed by her own rage. But the guys that were doing this were, you know, that they themselves are setting the tone. So it's interesting, Alex, that you talk about club management setting the tone, but actually, I think we've all got to be mindful of our own behaviour in and around the grounds as well, and setting the tone. Because, you know, for me, I'm a little bit old-fashioned in that I believe that, you know, parents set the tone for their kids. Behaviours are learned from people, and I can't help but think there were a lot of people yesterday that could have been setting a better tone, that are age responsible to set that tone, that maybe simply were setting completely the wrong tone and sending out the wrong messages. And it wasn't the young brigade. I don't know what your thoughts on that.
The one thing I'll say about that as well, Hannah, is there was a video actually from the I think it was from the bottom end of the Don Rogers of the home leg, when they were goading them, and the worst bloke of it was probably a guy about the same age as me. I've got 3 daughters, and I wouldn't imagine doing something like that.
Yeah,
and it's and like I say, I've probably been to 850 Swindon games over 30, 35 years, and that's the worst I've ever seen, ever experienced.
And I just add with Hannah, sorry, just to butt in on with the away fans. Obviously, normally after a game, I go up to the Stratton Bank end, I roll the Sky Bet mats in and start getting the Stratton Bank goal out. Marcus and another lad sort of go down to the town end. So I sort of take a little bit of a risk when there's fans in the Stratton Bank. But I mentioned it on the way up yesterday to the lads. Port Vale were by far the worst at, chucking stuff at me, verbal abuse. I mean, Rovers, when we drew 1-1, I had great banter with Rovers. And if you think out of anyone in the league, you think they're the ones that are going to chuck stuff at me and chuck me a load of abuse. Actually, they were just more, bantery, whereas Port Vale were actually vicious towards me. I'm only rolling a Sky Bet mat in. I'm not looking at them. I'm not trying to goad them, nothing. And it's I kind of already had my back up about Port Vale before even going there last night, so it probably didn't come as much of a surprise to me of their behaviour, to be honest.
Well, Alex, look, I just want to make that clear. The attention that I was getting in particular, the goading that I was on the receiving end of, I was stood amongst a really diverse group of supporters. I was stood with a lady that's, probably got, and she probably won't thank me for saying this, but I was stood with a lady that probably had about 10, 15 years on me, clearly had a young daughter with her. I was stood amongst a lot of kind of very, very young supporters who were just literally there, had been waving the flags. And I personally was doing nothing more than standing there with first of all, with my hands in my pockets. And then my response to the goading was to ignore it and just start picking up flags and rolling flags up. And there were guys that were my age and older, and girls my age and older, and indeed some younger females that was trying desperately to get some form of reaction from me, like it was sport. Now, my attitude to that has always been: we don't react because you don't give them the oxygen they need to breathe. But I will go back. It's interesting you say that about Chris made the point about goading and whatnot. Let's not. I'm not going to for a minute going to say that we don't have an element of our supporters that get overexcited and behave in a manner that isn't right. And you've only got to look at recent news and stories that have broken in the advert with I think it's 15, 20 odd supporters that have been charged with offences relating to the Bradford game. So it's not that we're not whiter than white. But last night I've got to give Swindon fans enormous credit in the large part because there was no attempt to get on the pitch at the final whistle. Not that there would have been, because we didn't have much to celebrate, but there was no attempt to get on the pitch when all this was going wrong either. There was real restraint showed by the town fans, and I'm sure that that's going to come out. Well, I hope that comes out in the investigation as well. But what I would say is anyone that is responsible for throwing things back on the pitch, if you do have your collar felt, you've only got yourself to blame, because you can't react like that. We owe it to our club to not react like that, to not respond. And sometimes turning the other cheek, I know it's hard, but turning the other cheek is what needs to be done, because don't lower yourself, and that was regrettable that there were, I can't, I didn't genuinely, I'm not saying this because I'm conveniently forgetting, I genuinely didn't see, because there were so many people, these things were coming from way back in the crowd because that's where they landed. And there was outrage. But I've got to say, there was restraint from town fans. But here's a question. I don't mind who answers it, but here's a question for you then. So we've used that wonderful word shithousing and Swindon's approach to the dark arts in this game. And there were moments in the first leg we picked up bookings for gamesmanship and things like that. We were very clear. There were certain times where our fans weren't returning the ball to the pitch, etc. I can't honestly say I'm not aware of anything going beyond that. So I mean, I don't know if anyone else. I mean, let's try and bring a Swindon fan in here with your wonderful red spectacles, sir. What's your take on it in terms of our fans' behaviour over the last two legs?
I think that they have been. I think to me they have been pretty good. Like McCurdy was alleging yesterday that he had like coins thrown in him. But as you've said, you also heard the coins being thrown, and I haven't heard any allegations of Swindon fan throwing coins or anything onto the pitch. It was only because Port Vale fans to me have only been saying that we were throwing seats onto the pitch apparently. But I haven't really seen any evidence of that because I was just watching it from my TV. So I didn't get a lot of view from the Swindon fans, but they weren't like that. To me, they weren't acting really aggressive at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, listen, I understand that tempers run high and all the rest of it, and maybe I'm just in some people's minds a boring old fart, but I I can't get my head around the logic of anyone that would want to break a seat and throw it onto the pitch. But when I left the ground, as I've turned to walk away, there was a fragment of a yellow seat that had made its way down near me. And I've got to tell you, the first thing that hit me, that struck me, excuse the pun, was, I mean, looking at it, the thing was like bloody great sharp edges on it. I wouldn't have wanted that in the side of my head. And it's not, are you honestly telling me that you can throw a segment of a chair with any kind of great accuracy? If that had struck me on the back of my bald head, that would have really done some damage. So, yeah, for whoever did that, thanks very much for considering my safety and that of all the other kids that were around me at the time. You know, again, give your head a wobble. And again, if you do get your collar felt, you've only got yourself to, to blame in that respect. But, yeah, I mean, very, very frustrating. I think, I mean, you know, again, Andrew, I appreciate your broadcasting responsibilities here, and I don't want to drag you into any kind of legal sort of you know, hot water or compromise your position with your employer. But the thing that struck me looking back over the highlights was, as the final whistle goes, what you normally tend to get in those instances is a congregating of fans around the halfway line and then around players' tunnel and whatnot. And it seemed to take a very long time, that large flock of crowd that seemed to sort of be intent on heading towards the away end, to then make their way back to the centre circle. Was that evident from a slightly more elevated perch?
Yeah, no, I think I would say that. Yeah, it did feel like when the pitch invasion happened that there was a greater proportion than usual heading for or gathering for that Swindon end. I think from what I saw and I can remember seeing, that was fair. That's kind of fair comment. I do remember thinking at the time, yeah, there is definitely a proportion here who have come to go to that end and, you know, give it large, to put it to very politely, to the Swindon fans, and then you do see the bottles going. I did see, just for the record, I did see one or two seats come back from the Swindon end, and there was some bottle throwing. So in the interest of balance, I should probably say that. But you know, you could kind of see the bottles coming into the away end pretty clearly. Coins obviously harder to discern from however far back we were. But yeah, there was a sense that was not quite the normal pitch invasion. I must admit, I was kind of more looking at that, so I didn't really kind of pick up nearly so much what was going on with the players as they were trying to escape.
Yeah, and let's spend a little bit of time on that, because how it gets to a stage where anyone in their right mind has been wound up to the point where, I mean, again, we need to be very, very clear here, because I don't think any of us will have seen all the footage and maybe what led to it. And I'm sure there will be counterclaims and such like. But we have seen fairly graphic images of Swindon Town players on social media with facial injuries. We've seen very graphic images of Swindon Town players ending up on the ground. And if it's what I think I saw today, a kind of mob descend on a player that ends up on the ground before rather large sort of bib wearing Swindon players that were in the area were then sort of gathering around and pushing people away and trying to get their teammates to safety. And I mean, I cannot get into my head what goes through your mind that you would want to approach and attack a professional athlete. You know, something goes horribly, horribly wrong when I mean, imagine, would you go and watch a stand-up comedian? And I appreciate that it's ironic given some of the things that have happened, but you wouldn't go and watch a stand-up comedian having a you know, a bit of fun with the audience, and then expect the audience en masse to rush the stage and start attacking the comedian at the end of a show. I mean, yes, there have been some incidents recently, some high-profile things that have happened that have all been across the press, but there seems to be this growing. I mean, but it's been a really bad couple of weeks, Andrew, hasn't it? For professional athletes being approached and abused and attacked by fans that seem to think they can act with impunity.
Yeah, and it has started to become a kind of consistent pattern for these playoffs. I think for, you know, all the ones the home sides have won this week. Nathan Jones was pretty angry about whatever happened after Huddersfield v Luton. I remember watching the end of that and seeing that the actually this was pretty bad. The linesman was 3/4 of the way across the pitch before the referee had clearly signalled to the players and it was over. So they need to get out of the way, and they kind of left the players to fend for themselves a bit. Now I think about that again, and obviously you've seen all the stuff from Nottingham Forest, Sheffield United. I mean, I almost have had the thought a bit earlier whether you suddenly feel you have to change the playoffs and make them one-legged games at a neutral ground. So you get equal sets of fans, play for 120 minutes, and if it's a draw, that's the side that's got the higher league position goes through. Whether you start to consider something like that, and even if you've got a conversation like that going, that would put the wind up broadcasters who would miss ratings and revenue and that from a few games, and the Football League who would. So I don't know whether that's an idea worth kicking around, whether the broadcasters who pay their fees would remotely even consider it, but it might make people sweat a bit if you really started to think you had to fundamentally change around with the nature of the playoffs, because you can't trust the fans of the home team when they go through in the second leg.
What a sad thing to even have to propose, Andrew. I mean, look, I'd like to bring Ellis in at this point. Ellis, you've just joined us with a speaker request. If you wouldn't mind unmuting your mic, I would like to ask you about your thoughts on deterrence. And I mean, Andrew's talking about being as strident as changing the format of the playoffs. But from your point of view, how do you deter people from what is quite clearly a creep from? I mean, I remember playoffs going back years where there would be these pitch invasions, but fans just seem to nonchalantly run past players because they're more interested in each other and celebrating. And you would see the players being sort of, that you might get the odd buffeting, but you'd see the players making their way off the pitch, crestfallen or otherwise. But now there is clear contact being made at these games that is more than just an innocent brushing of shoulders. I mean, how do you deter that?
Well, it's a tough one, really. I was hit by a bottle yesterday at the game, and it's just like, what can you do to stop it? Because you've got the likes of lifetime bans and such, but you can see from the videos yesterday, it's hard to make out who's actually on the pitch, and there's so much going on in it. Like, what can you do?
I think, well, look, Ellis, from my point of view, the answer is technology on a few fronts. Okay, so the thing that baffled me a little bit today, before the news broke that there was now a live police investigation that Staffordshire Police were dealing with a number of, well, hopefully it's come off the back of, because in order to investigate, you need an allegation and then you need evidence. But you could not dispute the fact that there was TV footage, a lot of TV footage, very clear footage that had been picked up by a major international broadcaster that showed misbehaviour of people on the pitch, right? Whether that be players, fans, whatever. There is clear disorder on that pitch and it's been recorded, okay? Police officers, it's very easy to point the finger at the police straight away and say it's down to the police, but it's very rare these days that police are responsible for security inside football stadiums. They can have a presence, but more often than not, clubs are clearly managing their own security, okay? So you start looking at the stewards. Now, I saw an awful lot of people there yesterday with wearing body cams. And the question that I was asking was, how many of those body cams are activated? How many of them were actually recording footage? And for me, the reason I asked that question is because straight away, you've got proximity with potential offenders and you've got recordings of both sides of the story, okay? But the other side, thinking about technology, is that, it cannot be. I mean, most stadiums now have got fairly complex CCTV systems that can pick up, record fans. And this is where I'm kind of hoping, because a lot of sometimes people get frustrated with the police at what they believe to be a lack of action. But what they don't necessarily understand is that somebody now involved in the police investigation will have and a team will have the painstaking responsibility of combing through a lot of the footage that they've got hold of. And I'm wholly confident people that were actually seen to be breaking the law will have their collars felt and will be held accountable for their action. But it's there is a phrase that gets used about dealing with things in slow time. So sometimes, actually, just because somebody doesn't get arrested there and then, doesn't mean that they're not going to get lifted further down the line, and dealt with accordingly. And that could be people getting picked out at future games. I mean, Ellis, have you ever been at a game where you've seen the police sort of enter a stand or security enter the stand and escort people out, and then wondered why that's happened?
Well, at the Walsall game, there were police in the stand escorting a few Swindon fans out for disorderly behaviour. But I've never seen like a police officer arrest someone for doing nothing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like,
I've been at games, Ellis. I've been at games where I've seen people being essentially being picked up by the police as they've exited stadiums, and I've heard them arguing, "What have I done wrong?" As in they hadn't done anything at that game. And my suspicion has always been, well, it's because they've got evidence of previous offences at previous games.
And at the Walsall game, I think the police handled it quite well, especially after the game. You know, they stepped off and they kind of blocked off the other half to prevent Swindon fans going over to the home fans.
They were very quick to do that, Ellis, weren't they? At Walsall?
Yeah,
very quick.
And it wasn't necessarily, they didn't know a pitch invasion was going to happen. There was a possibility, but it wasn't definitely going to happen. So they obviously had a plan, and you kind of ask yourself, why didn't they have it last night? Because it's a playoff semi-final, and you would think there'd be more police there. But
sorry to interrupt there, Hannes. That's one thing I was surprised about. Why was that police line behind the goal? Why wasn't it on the edge of the penalty box? It was, or someone like that to separate them from getting so close. They made no effort to keep them away.
Yeah. Well, I think. I mean, listen. I think. We've got through an awful lot in relation to this, and I think it's only right and proper that we give. Now we know that the issue is being dealt with by the authorities. That we give the authorities the opportunity to deal with the disorder that was, from my perspective, the alleged disorder, as the authorities would like me to say, like to deal with the alleged disorder in a timely manner, and I'm sure they will. I'm confident enough that they will. It's very easy to get frustrated and say, "Nah, they won't." But I will be very, very certain with the technology that is available at their disposal that there will be action taken against certain individuals. And if that happens to be on both sides, it will be on the basis that there is evidence. So we wish the authorities all their best. And I would point out that Port Vale came in for a lot of stick, certainly early this morning, as there was a lot of images, or rather a lot of tweets going around with allegations of disorder. And Port Vale have now come out and condemned the actions of anybody in that ground that was causing disorder, which is welcome and is the right thing to do. We wish obviously both police forces well with their investigation, and we're going to watch it with great interest. But look, we're part of that, because that's all. It's sad. It needed to be talked about because it was all part of everyone's journey last night. But let's start taking a look forward at this juncture. Where do we go from here? Now, Andrew, I'll bring you back in at this stage, because I appreciate you weren't necessarily on the mic per se in the era that I'm going to talk about, but I tweeted earlier today that this season has got echoes of Swindon Town 1991-92 under Glenn Hoddle, where a very, very talented team of technicians were just not quite good enough to make the cut that season. But we all know what happened the following season, when we actually decided to do the business in the playoffs. First question is, Andrew, do you see similarities in those echoes, and are you feeling bullish in relation to next year?
Yeah, going back to 91-92, that's stretching my memory, but it's quite an interesting proposition, isn't it? Whether you can kind of keep the core of the team and build on it. I think what does that depend on? I think it depends very much on centre half recruitment and who gets kept. What the status are, whether Dion Conroy will move on, as we've discussed, whether Matthew Baudry will retire or not, or whether he will actually feel that he has finally found the kind of personal fitness regime for him that is going to allow him to play regular games at last, and what other sort of centre halves they bring in, and what they do in terms of strikers. But if they can keep the core of the midfield together, and there seem to be quite sort of positive noises about Reid and Williams, so nothing I know of is definitive. Then they're in a really good position with a midfield that can win you matches in that division. Make sure you find your combination of ball playing and physical defenders. And there's normally so much movement in this league from most clubs that quite often, they'll be fielding 8 or 9 players in their team at the start of one season, and they'll have gone somewhere else in the next. There's such a big turnaround that if you can keep 10 or 12 or 14 of your team, I think you do give yourself a genuine advantage in terms of where you kind of begin pre-season and begin your season, because you don't have to go, through all that, just the sort of players getting to know each other and establishing that good group culture, which it feels pretty evident that Swindon have got. So potentially there's a pretty decent base to build on with one or two tweaks and one or two positions getting hopefully the kind of reinforcements that you weren't able to have with the size of the squad this year.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you raise, Andrew. I think on a couple of fronts, really. Firstly, yeah, as you say, the turnaround, whilst it frustrates the hell out of us, we all seem to sort of hang our kind of argument on this, another rebuild. Well, yeah, guess what? We're in the lower leagues. The days of clubs giving out 4 or 5 year contracts are long gone. That is a bygone era. And whether that be Bosman or whether that be just financial realities, a lower league, whatever, that's a reality that we just got to get our heads around. There's always going to be an element of churn. However, I do sense, Andrew, I believe that the club want to keep the core that we've got for this team together, a la 91, 92, where a lot of those guys, we were able to keep that core together and build on it. I think a lot of it's going to come down to whether or not how many of these lads really buy into each other and crucially buy into what Mr. Morfuni and Mr. Angus are putting in place at our club. Because the winds of change at the county ground have blown this season, and we've had significant sort of surge of optimism at the county ground. 5-figure crowds have become the norm at the county ground, and you don't get that at a lot of other clubs. We talked about the rumours of Dion Conroy moving on, for example. Dion's not going to be playing in front of 5-figure crowds at Leyton Orient anytime soon, and that in itself has got to be a big pull. I mean, Chris, bring you back in at this stage. Yeah. How are you feeling about? I mean, I'm going to get Andrew's thoughts on this because Andrew gets a little bit more contact than most of us with the first team squad. But your gut reaction? Do you feel that we've got it about us to keep hold of the likes of Johnny Williams, Jack Payne, Louis Reid, 3 vital cogs in our team? Do you think they're going to be in the red and white next year?
Well, when was it at the game at Harrogate? I and a group of other fans were actually speaking to Johnny Williams, his dad, who said he had signed. So I'm not fussed about Williams because I'm pretty sure he has signed. Well, or was going to sign. Reid's a bit. I'm not sure. I would love to keep Reid as well, but the embargo's not happening. If people are sniffing around, that's the issue. That the embargo's going to cost us. The one thing that I do think that the glaring, we obviously know there's some flaws here, and we've touched on the forwards and strikers, but I think height's another thing that we've missed this year. So especially when you look at that midfield 3. Yeah, I think the tallest of them might be 5'5".
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And it really looked odd, didn't it, when Gladwin comes on and he slots in amongst the other like 2 of the 3. When you suddenly have that, you do. I mean, you saw him yesterday in defensive positions, attacking the ball on the edge of our 18, and you do sort of feel a little bit more reassured when the big balls are, are bombing forward. That we've got another big body in there. I think. Andrew, come back to you on this. I mean, Chris has said about sort of whispers that Williams is going to be here. I've heard similar whispers in relation to Louis Reid being very content and wanting to remain at the club. I guess it's going to come down to, obviously, even if they've got the Louis Reed has performed at such a level that even if we've got the intent to do something very special in Wiltshire, if a big Championship club comes calling and is offering him life-changing amounts of money, it's a big decision for him, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if you're from his point of view, it's very, if a Championship club comes in, then it's a different matter, because even at Championship level, clubs are going to be able to blow Swindon out of the water in terms of the wages they can offer and the kind of career progression, really. So, I mean, the financial gap between, goodness knows, Championship and even League One is frightening when you look at all those sheets of clubs spending, 192% of their revenue, whatever it is, Reading tend to do on player wages. So, for him, that's difficult. Johnny Williams seems a bit different just because of the kind of relationship he's got with Ben Garner, and that it perhaps matters to him more to be playing regularly, both for maybe kind of his contentment and his Welsh place as well, really, than maybe some other players. So I feel he might be a sort of slightly different case in terms of, a club in League One could come and offer him a bit more money, but I'm not necessarily sure that is such a motivation for him at this stage. That's the sense I get. But let's not get too romantic about footballers and increased wages, because they are all encouraged to maximise everything they can from relatively short careers.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, I'm wholly, for what it's worth, I'm wholly confident that we'll keep the spine of the team. I've got everything crossed that. Matt Bowdery has obviously talked about leaving football and a burgeoning career in finance. I would hope that another year of football is not something that would delay those plans massively for him. And he's quite clearly shown us that he's got an awful lot to give. And with a full pre-season under his belt, you would imagine that he'd be in a position to hit the ground running next season. And I think we're in a good position with the goalkeeper, in that we've got, I can imagine, clearly Lewis Ward being part of the mix next year. We've got Idem as a backup goalkeeper already through the door. I can't imagine that's going to break the bank to keep him here. I think it would be there's an interesting sort of dilemma now. I think if you're Jojo Woolacott, and I mean, I'll be really interested in getting anyone's view on this, really, in that it's going to be, Jojo's now in a really interesting sort of position going into the new season, because he's lost his place at Swindon Town as a consequence, as Ben Garner would have you, of injury. Lewis Ward has not done anything wrong. But he's got only a few months away now. He's got a World Cup in Qatar to consider, and he's in a very, very difficult spot now. We can speculate as to whether or not he's not playing because other clubs have come in for him, and maybe his eyes are elsewhere. But let's just take Ben Garner at his word and say he's not coming because he's injured. Does anyone have a hope in hell that they're going to see Jojo Woolacott in a Swindon shirt next season? I'll literally put that out to anyone.
I would be surprised if Jojo's here next year. But actually, he was brilliant early season, but once he came back after the African Nations Cup, he wasn't the same. He wasn't, for whatever reasons, he just wasn't as good as he was earlier. So I actually think I'll be very, very surprised if he's at Swindon next season.
Yeah. And I guess the other issue with Jojo is going to be that let's say we do keep him, can you afford to be missing him for the maybe 3 or 4 weeks that he would be away, especially in a period like December where you get fixture pile up as well? But I just
agree.
Want to wash their hands of it, maybe, and that Ward's not really put a foot wrong. So I'm personally comfortable having Lewis Ward as the number one next season myself.
I think you've kind of got to look at it from a selfish perspective, where yes, we want to keep Woolacott, like we want to have that option there, but if you're Ward, you don't want to be in goal 1 week and out of goal next week. You want to keep him in form, because, like you said, Woolacott will be out anyway over December. So I personally think start Ward at the start of the season, and then he goes into form in December, rather than his first game being like midway through the season.
Yeah. It's Ellis. It's a point that I'm going to probably repeat a point that if you're a regular listener, you hear me say quite regularly over the last sort of 3-4 weeks, which is speaking as an ex-goalkeeper myself. I am a huge believer that you shouldn't, as a manager, and I'm saying this from a keeper's perspective. Okay, I don't think you should be in a position. I think you should always have two goalkeepers, and certainly have a third goalkeeper, because you need that from a coaching point of view. Even if you've got the young buck pushing through, but you should have two goalkeepers that are going at it hammer and tong. And I don't think it's healthy that any goalkeeper feels that they're at a club and they are the number one, my undisputed number one. I think that is a breeding ground for complacency. And I was overjoyed, only from a point of view that it tunes into my thoughts on it, when Lewis Ward was back in the side. And I've been chuffed to see Lewis Ward do as well as he has. And I think one of the reasons he's done that is because I believe he's actually won the shirt back. He's been put in. He's not put a foot wrong. He's earned the shirt, and now the onus is on Jojo to get the shirt back off him, which is good for everybody. You've got to have that competition amongst your goalkeepers.
We had that earlier in the season though as well, when probably the best goalkeeper performance of the season was when Ward against Salad FC earlier, and then one game after he was just replaced. But against Forest Green, he was brilliant.
He wasn't he? Didn't put a foot wrong. And I'm with you, Chris. I mean, and just to be clear, and again, I've said this many times, I think we are blessed to have two of the best goalkeepers in the division on our book, as has been proved by their performances. I mean, take, for example, going into the penalty shootout last night, it wasn't just blind faith. I just really fancied Lewis to rise to the occasion, and lo and behold, he did. But again, equally, in a real high-pressure game, he showed great composure, both on the deck and with his hands, right across the 120 minutes. And he was great in the penalty shootout as well. So I know he's certainly got the minerals to deliver what we need next year. I think the thing in my mind will be, is Manny Idem going to be good enough to step up from that third position, which is very much a training benefit, and really put the heat under Lewis if Jojo goes. If he isn't, then we're going to have to probably spend a bit of money to bring in a goalkeeper of similar calibre.
The thing with Ward as well is, since he's come back in, the one thing I think he's been really good at is coming, not so much coming to claim the ball, but coming as we lack height and the punching the ball and getting it clear.
Yeah, I listen. I completely agree. Sorry, Ellis. I definitely want to hear from you on this, but I think that, like I said earlier in the show, for me, it's no surprise that our two centre backs have totally blossomed at a time where Lewis has come into the side for that very reason, because you're coached as a goalkeeper from a very, very young age. Command your 6-yard box, but the best goalkeepers command their 18-yard box, and they're punching. You've got to remember, Lewis is 6'5", 6'6", right? So Lewis jumps in the air. Lewis, let's say he puts 3 foot on that, all right? So suddenly you've got aerial power of 9 foot something. And that's before he then stretches up what is probably another 2.5, 3 foot of arm. So before you know it, you've got 12 foot of aerial superiority in and around your box. If your keeper isn't coming for crosses and corners, particularly when you're one of the smaller sides in the league, there is something very, very, very wrong. And I think for everything Jojo brings you on the deck, Lewis brings a totally different dimension to our defensive power. So yeah, I'm all for it. Sorry, Ellis, we're not going to cut you off. I definitely want to hear your point.
That's fine. What I was going to say was, it's the same as any outfield player, really. Like, for example, Baldry and Conroy at the back. Why would you switch them out if their past 5 games have been solid at the back? Why would you switch them out and start O'Brien, for example? Like, you're gonna start the player that's been in form, and I don't think in any of the previous 4 or 5 games Ward has done anything that would make you say I don't want him in goal, and yeah, I don't think he's done anything wrong to justify swapping him out for Woolacott.
Yeah, I completely agree.
The only questionable thing I would say about Ward, and I probably think a lot of people might agree with it, is his kicking isn't great. Certainly, that's the one advantage Woolacott got that's over him. But Ward just is that bit more commanding in his box. than Wollacott is. It's
yeah, 100%. Well, listen, I mean, okay, we'll park that for a tick, because Andrew, I want to bring you back in at this stage just to sort of have a quick conversation about our about sort of the retain list, etc. We're now obviously we're at a point of the season where you're going to imagine the club are going to be putting the retain list out. From your point of view, when are you expecting to see that?
I don't think we've got anything definite yet, but I would imagine they will want to do it pretty swiftly to, allow the players to know where they stand and go and, recharge or find new clubs or whatever. So we don't have any dates, but most clubs who league season and finished at the normal time and kind of got it out within the week. So I would assume, and I'll say assume sometime next week. Quickly on the goalkeepers, I'm not sure things look that good for Edem, simply because he hasn't really challenged the first two, and of course the one time he should have been on the bench. Ben Garno rarely calls out his players in public, said he missed a team meeting, and so he wasn't. So I think my suspicion is he may well be on that list, and not in a good way. But again, that's me surmising rather than having any inside information.
Yeah, and you've got to be spotless as well. By the way, as a third goalkeeper, you cannot be affording to put a foot wrong on so many fronts, because you've got to make sure you're telling your coaching staff you are ready at every single opportunity. But also, I mean, you're so important as well to the goalkeeping collective, because typically you've got a goalkeeper coach, you've got your first choice, your second choice. The serving, as you'll probably see in the warm-ups at the county ground, our third goalkeeper is always on the pitch, warming up the other goalkeepers, and it's so they can both work at the same time and nobody's getting cold and picking up injuries or things like that. They're all working at the same pace. Now, it's it was a very, very, I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but from what I understand, it was like being late to a team meeting or something. Then that obviously is going to draw question marks around things like your things like your professionalism. But then the one thing I will say, for a goalkeeper, Manny Idem is still a baby, and also what I would say is, I mean, we've not seen enough of him. One sort of Wiltshire Shield match will not define what this guy can bring to the table, but what I will say is that he's an imposing figure. He's a big lad. He's a young lad. He's got, hopefully, if he's got ability about him, he's shown enough that he'll be given the opportunity to, to step up as and when required. But yeah, Andrew, you made a very valid point. Sorry, Chris, you were going to say?
I was going to say, with retained lists, I would expect it either Monday or Tuesday. Bear in mind, Northampton released theirs today, which was 2 days after their game. I don't know what the date is, but there is a set date where you have to release your retained list by. So it will definitely be early next week.
Yeah.
And well, we can discuss who we think might be on that. But
yeah, who? Okay, so I mean, let's put this out, Alex. I mean, again, appreciate you're a little closer to the club than most of us, but I'm not going to ask you to betray any confidences or compromise you professionally. If you were a betting man, speaking purely as a fan, who do you think? Do you think there will be any surprises on that list? Are you expecting to see any surprises on that list?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just on IDEM. Again, didn't see him at Port Vale at home on Sunday, which he normally would have. So yeah, I don't know on that one, but I can't see him probably being around, if I'm being totally honest. With regard to sort of retained and released, yeah, I don't really have any strong opinions on that. I actually really haven't even actually had a look at who's out of contract and who's not. So forgive me on that one. I was just going to butt in there just to say I was going to exit the conversation, but I just had an answer to your question. I've just been in a WhatsApp message with Cass about the pitch, and yeah, you cannot change your pitch dimensions during the season, and that includes playoff games as well. So you have to stipulate at the start of the season. You stipulate your dimensions, and that is that for the whole season. So if they have changed it, then they've gone against regulations. But I wouldn't imagine they would have took that risk. But it may just have looked slightly.
Yeah, I don't know. I think,
maybe different.
You know what, Alex? I think it was just it was just my personal opinion, because I didn't go to Vale earlier in the season. But what I was expecting, my at my kind of vantage point was this very, very wide, expansive pitch, and I just didn't get that flavour. And I think what skewed my view was that the light, like, you know, particularly as you're looking at it from where the town fans were, that your touchline on the right hand side was clearly looked about sort of 10 meters in from their stand. There was a huge amount of grass that side. So purely why. So we're not suggesting there's any skullduggery or wrongdoing or any investigations to be had on Val's part.
Be nice if there was, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be lovely? Yeah. Well, let's hope the authorities are listening, and let's just hope they're dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
And then just the second point, me and Marcus just been discussing as well. I think I missed the first 5 or 6 minutes, so if anyone discussed it, and I'm sorry for going off topic, obviously, just before I exit, but Garner is always on to me and Marcus about make sure the pitch is wet, make sure it's got enough moisture in it so we can zip it around, and that's a massive factor last night, lads. Massive. That pitch was it hadn't been watered. You could tell that it wasn't watered at half time, and you could tell our players were a bit shocked in the first 5-6 minutes. Their passes were way short, and I think it took us a long time to adjust. I texted Marcus and sort of said about the water, and he said obviously that would just completely destroy our game plan, because the gaffer is, when we had a little sort of malfunction with the sprinklers about 6 or 7 weeks ago, that really affected us in one of the halves where the sprinklers malfunctioned. We weren't able to get the water on, and the gaffer sort of said after, no fault of anyone's, it's just one of those things, but it completely went against us. I think that might have been the what was the game after Walsall? We won 5-0, didn't we? And then we didn't do so well on the Saturday. I can't remember what the game was.
Bolford, I think it was.
Yeah, so that second half, I think we went 1-0 up, and then because we hadn't got enough water on the pitch dried out, and it just completely threw the lads. So I think that's probably, again, a dark art. But sorry, Hannes, for going off conversation topic, but I just wanted to get them 2 points in before I exited, because I knew you'd kind of be keen to hear about the answers for the dimensions question.
No, Alex, that's brilliant insight from you, mate. We really do appreciate it. That was the one thing that I kind of neglected, and it was on my list, my shit housing list, to raise the fact that, you're absolutely right. It was quite clear when you were seeing the guys trying to hit those balls. I think one of the reasons why some of the long balls were going a little bit awry was they were having to really put some meat on it, because it just wasn't carrying.
I was doing a rain dance at half time, but unfortunately I checked the weather forecast and there was absolutely no sign of any rain. So,
well, like I say, we blame you, Alex. It's all down to you, mate. We could have had Wembley. Alex Veach, ladies and gentlemen, send your complaints to the county ground with his attention. Thanks, Alex. Really appreciate it. You enjoy your evening, buddy. Appreciate your input.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Hannes, to put you on we're talking about this retain list.
Yeah.
Is there people there you sort of in and about the team that you think might not be offered a deal?
I think we've already touched on Jojo, and I think it's a real shame because he's quality. But you know what? I'd see Jojo depart with nothing but our best wishes or my best wishes from a point of view, not the goalkeeping union sympathy, but purely because he was one of the faces that could have walked away from any commitments or otherwise at the county ground last summer, and he didn't. From what I understand, there was Mildy had worked very, very hard to bring him back to the county ground, and he was super keen to come, and he's honoured that, and he's come back, and he was sparkling for the large part of the season, got himself in the driving seat for number one for Ghana, and he's going to go to the World Cup, all being well to the lad, and he's achieved that in the red and white Swindon Town, or the pink or the blue, depending which way you look at it. So I think I'd be very, very surprised if we retain him, and good luck to him. I hope he goes on, gets a whopping great big payday. And all I hope is that he goes to a club and plays. Because it would be terrible to go to a club for say terrible, depending which way you look at it. He could go to a club and earn really good money for 3 years and just not play. And I think we would probably. I guess the dilemma he's got now is Wardy's come in and done so well. He would have probably been thinking, well, I'm going to play regularly at Swindon and maybe stay for another season just to ensure that I'm going to the World Cup and I'm playing. But if he goes somewhere, I just hope he goes and he's got assurances he's going to stay. I think looking through numbers, I know squad numbers, but looking through 2 to 11, similar scenario really with lads like Dion, lads like Hunty. I'd like to think that Hunty would stay. I would say that one of our lads that he would certainly. I mean, what was he subject to a £200,000 bid from Reading from Wrexham? Sorry, in the summer.
Yeah.
So I can see that there would be interest in Hunty. I don't believe Hunty's local to the area. I think like Dion, his family are out Essex or East London way, and I think there would probably be takers in that area.
Hunt is. I mean, I saw a message earlier about 3 Swindon players linked to Orient, and I thought Conroy Hunt and Oda Mayo would probably have been those 3 players.
Yeah, well, you've taken the words right out of my mouth, mate. On the next one, so great spot. I think. Okay, so I've got real mixed emotions in relation to Akin Odimayo because I certainly hold no ill will towards Akin. I think Akin's been a terrific servant for us, Player of the Year last year. In a very, very poor, admittedly, Swindon Town team. But I think any player that has already kind of made efforts to be away from the county ground, but there were obviously very difficult circumstances in the summer. But I think the fact that he kind of came back because other options that he'd been trying to engineer or others were engineering for him didn't work out. That ended up being it felt like more of a marriage of convenience as opposed to a player that really necessarily, really, really, really wanted to be here. And that may be very unfair on Akin because he may well have wanted to be here. This is just my perception. I think as a centre-back, I have question marks. Again, speaking from a keeper's perspective, he doesn't give me the impression he's the most vocal centre-back or indeed full-back. But I think you get away with not necessarily being the most vocal when you're playing at full-back. I think he's probably the most. It would be a shame because of his versatility, but I don't think he is. I don't think he's the answer for us at centre-back next year. So it wouldn't surprise me, Chris, if the 3 of those guys ended up joining Richie Wellens down the road just because it's convenient.
Think that probably the thing that hinders Odimayo is the fact he is versatile. So he's moving around, so he's not being able to move on and concentrate in one position. And fair enough, if you're versatile, it does help. But sometimes when you're young, you need to specifically know about your position.
Yeah, and you know what, Chris? I mean, this is the thing. I mean, a lot will depend on any assurances he's given. I mean, if let's say, for example, we were talking theoreticals here, but if Matt Bowdry is going to be, exiting stage left, and if Dion is to be leaving the club, as the rumours that you've heard, let's say, those come to fruition, if the management team are turning around and going, look, there's a real opportunity here, you are going to be one of my 2 centre-backs, I want you in the mix, then what? Yeah, he's going to play regularly, isn't he? And would he then choose to twist it, and go somewhere where he might not get the opportunity to play? Whereas at least at Swindon, he's a known quantity. But I think he's probably to your question about who do I suspect would probably end up sort of leaving. I could see that Akin would probably be one of those that would depart. I think going up through the midfield, I genuinely believe everyone seems to be of the opinion, well, there's no chance we're keeping Jack Payne. But I've got a feeling, I spoke to Jack Payne very early in the season, just one of those casual car park passings, but he just stayed that little bit longer than you sort of expect from pros, which suggested to me that he was quite happy to put this out there. And I just thanked him for hanging around in the summer because I said it's for a player of your ability to stay in League Two, that's huge for us. And we're clearly going to be building a team around you. And he wasn't being big-headed about it. He was sort of nodding along. He went, no, I get where you're coming from. And then I was like, what is your motivation, mate? Is it just a lack of opportunities? And his take on it was that I just found a home. I just feel a place that for the first time in my career, I can really settle. And I don't want to be known as someone that just jumped from one lily pad to the next. I love it here. I love the lads. I love the club. I love the fans. So I've got a feeling that I reckon we're going to keep all 3 of our starting midfielders. I think McCurdy's already in the bag, so there's not an issue there. And I actually think, as we mentioned earlier, we talked about Davison and Tyree Simpson. I've got a feeling Mr. Morfuni will bankroll deals to bring Tyrese back and keep Davison. I mean, I noticed Tyrese today was very active on social media getting involved with a lot of retweets in relation to the club and we go again next year and things like that. He's kept a close eye on what the lads are doing. So
well,
I think Mr. Morfuni
he's been to the games as well, though, hasn't he? And I think that's a significant thing. Is he going to go to these games then and then go to sign for someone else?
And
yeah,
Chris,
I also earlier on as well. I also had a little look, and the only team he's following on Twitter is Swindon. So, you know, that could be a positive.
He's a bright lad. He is a bright lad.
But in terms of we're talking about retain list and release players. Obviously, we've there touched on the big players. I'm pretty sure that obviously Ryan East and I think probably Mitchell Lawson will not be off the contracts. That's purely my opinion rather than.
Yeah, so
there's also the case of Aguiar as well, because is Aguiar out of contract? Because he's one I'd like to definitely see stick around, because I think
he was only given a 1-year contract, but I'm pretty sure he'll be given a contract.
If Ricky Aguiar is not in a Swindon Town shirt next season, guys, I will eat my hat.
Yeah.
So listen, I think, I mean, you've mentioned all the names that I think are probably on the watch list. I think I was gonna say, I mean, for me, it must have been an incredibly frustrating season for Jaden Mitchell-Lawson. You know, somebody that's known to the club, that knows the club. You know, pace is a quantity that is in high demand. Fits, you know, on paper, fits our style of play. But because of obviously the emergence of Harry, you know, with Louis Barry coming in, and with the style of play that we operate, it must be a very frustrating season for him. So I think if he has options to go away, I think he possibly could. The only, again, the flip side of that is that, you know, that was a lad that had a big reputation. With Louis Barry leaving the club, he may well get an opportunity to come in. He may well be offered a run, and he may well show him in pre-season that he's got something about him. And so, yeah, I think those really are all. I mean, Ryan East is an interesting one because clearly he's a player that Ben Garner very, very much admires. The issue that Ryan East has got is that when he in the games that he did come in and fill in for Louis Reed, you know, he didn't really pull up any trees. He was at fault for goals, or certainly, you know, one of a collective that was at fault for goals. So, but has he done enough to sort of be shown the door? I can't imagine he's on that much money. So I can envisage Ryan East still being here next year.
I'm not so sure on that, but the other thing with that as well is I don't think he's. His position is Louis Reed's position, and it's a bit unfortunate that he's been pushed into that. But I'm not so sure he'll be offered a new deal, especially when you look at how many midfielders we've got. I just don't think he'll be offered one.
I think, Chris, what's interesting about East, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. And you know, it's sort of shoehorned in as almost like understudy to Louis Reed. But at the same time, I mean, he had Ellis's emergence on left centre midfield, sort of, you know, scuppered any hope of slotting into the midfield at that time. But now Ellis has now graduated back into the sort of left wing back role and has been doing really well. So is that gonna be Ellis's position moving forward? Because that was what everyone seemed to be saying. I think a lot's going to depend on, you know, if Jack does move on. You know, Willow, like I said, all the signs are that Willow's going to be here next year. So I think if we lose any one of those three, I think it opens an opportunity for Eastie to stay. But at the same time, listen, we started talking in this segment about the team in 91, 92, and then how that then turned into the team in 92, 93. Well, that we're going to need upgrades in this team, and that's not doing anyone a disservice. But if we're going to have a proper run at the title, then we need proper depth. And with all due respect, if I reflect on our championship winning team under Richie Wellens, and it's lovely to see that Mr. Caddis has joined us, and he may well have an opinion on this. But if you look at our midfield options in particular under Richie Wellens, there wasn't just depth, but there was quality as well. You know, Danny Rose was like one that was pushing to get a game, and with all due respect to Eastie, a Danny Rose he is not.
No, when we look at our team this year, I think what we really lacked, I mean, and I think it's probably it was exposed more when Lydon went out, was another. Louis Reed's got it all, but you could maybe even say like an Anthony Grant type, but I think Grant's legs maybe gone a bit this year.
Yeah,
But we need that sort of
ship has
midfielder in,
sailed,
and that's
Chris.
why I thought we really missed Lydon when he got injured.
Yeah.
Coming down the stretch, he would have been immense.
Oh, he would have been, and this is the thing. I think there's no doubt in, Jordan Lydon is, certainly one of the best midfielders under the roof, and not only that, he's one of the best midfielders at this standard. It was his injury and the nature of it is absolutely wretched for him. But on the good news with Jordan Lydon is that all the chat on the show earlier in the week was that Jordan Lydon was seen, walking freely, very comfortably around the club. We know that Jordan's obviously been keeping on top of as much of his fitness as he can without sort of like putting too much strain on what is a really, really serious injury. He's got a big summer ahead of him. But I think you've got to trust our medical team who've done wonders this year in terms of nursing, a relatively paper thin squad through the season. You've got to put faith in them to get Jordan both in terms of mind and body back where he needs to be for the start of kickoff. But that's a big mountain Jordan's got to climb. I think you would be remiss to be going into the new season hanging your plans off, and that's no disrespect to Jordan, but I think you'd be remiss going into the new season hanging your hopes on Jordan coming good, because I just think that put too much pressure on him.
I just quickly going back on the previous point. I think one of our downfalls this season has been our depth of the squad. I mean, we saw it when McCurdy got injured. I mean, McCurdy himself is a great player, so when you don't have the likes of him on the pitch, you're going to struggle anyway. But we haven't really got the replacement there. And when Simpson got recalled, we didn't have a striker, and we obviously had to get Davison in on loan. And just even in yesterday's game, you get to the later part of the game, and you ask questions: who do you bring on? And you look on the bench, and who do you bring on? But
Ellis,
I do think we need to get a stronger bench for next season, definitely.
Ellis, I think you're going to find that I'm just going to agree with you again, because again, I look at your bio picture, mate, and if I don't agree with you, you're going to challenge me again in the ring and probably punch my face in. So you're going to just find us all agree with you, mate, and say, yeah, you're absolutely fine. No, but in all seriousness, Ellis, you've nailed, I think, what we've talked about throughout this show, really, at all stages. That in relation to last night, if you looked across our bench, did we have many game changers on the bench beyond Ben Gladwin? Probably not. And is that something that Ben Garner would have been happy about going into this season with? Absolutely not. And is that something I'm comfortable and confident in Ben Garner to rectify in the summer? 110%. And not just Ben Garner, let's remember. I mean, whilst Ben Garner's going about doing his job, we've not mentioned Ben Chorley's name once on this phone-in. And Ben Chorley deserves a huge amount of credit for. I mean, Ben Chorley, obviously, director of football, has driven. Will be the one that is out there responsible for driving recruitment in Swindon Town. And I don't think you can point too many fingers at Ben Chorley this year and say he's brought duds into the club. Every single player, we've been really unfortunate with injury, but every single player pretty much, all right, you can say there have been a couple that have been a bit underwhelming, some of the names we've mentioned, but the recruitment this year, they've all stood up to scrutiny.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say about our depth this year, a lot of that comes down to the embargo. We're so limited on what we can do, and that's, I think that's purely the only reason why we've done that, because our hands are tied.
Yeah, I put out a tweet earlier. I said, I basically said, if we can build a team like this in 2 weeks before the season with a transfer embargo, like what are we going to be able to do this summer? Like,
and you'll notice, Ellis, just again, because I don't want to get my head caved in. I did like that, retweet it and quote tweet it, and I'll be sending you a crate of beer in the morning as well. So thank you, Ellis. And Ellis, we're going to rename the show the Ellis Holloway Lounge.
Fantastic, yeah.
At the end of tonight, because we're all very appreciative of you, Ellis. Thank you.
I'll let you off.
You're very kind. Well, listen, I think I mean, I think really we've the only I think we've done it by virtue of the show really across the board. The only other thing we were going to talk about in relation to the retain list was obviously the loanees of this year, and I think it's I was about 3-4 weeks ago. I was making really positive noises because I had a feeling that I didn't think it was going to be too difficult to convince Joe Tomlinson to come back. I thought I just very, very clear. Tyrese wants to return. I thought Joe Davison would be hopefully a tap in for us in terms of the financials and in terms of Charlton letting him go. I don't believe that we're going to ever see Romilly Critchlow. I certainly think it would be a miracle if we see Kate Kessler-Hayden back in the Swindon shirt. And looking at the nature of Louis Barry's tweet today, although there were rumours I think it was last week or the week before, that Louis Barry could potentially get a move back to Swindon, I think that would have probably been on the basis of League One football, because Villa are going to be looking at his development and wanting him sort of, tested a bit further up the leagues. I think my feeling is I think you could potentially see Louis Barry come back if his development stalls next year, if he's given an opportunity at League One, much like what happened at Ipswich. And if we're flying high in the league. I think
Mark, I'm not even calling you Mark.
No, I quite like that. It's very rare I get called Mark, but no, that's fine.
The thing about that was with Barry, and I think we've seen from this season, is he's had some very quiet games. So I don't think actually a season in League Two would be the worst thing for his career.
Oh, listen, I completely agree with you, and I think his development. I mean, he was stalled a little bit by an unfortunate injury just as he was coming to the boil, in my view. But I don't believe he's going to be the kind of asset that if Villa put up for sale, we could afford him. So I think naturally, I think we would have seen him come back in League One. I don't think we're going to see him at the start of the season, but we keep our fingers crossed. And then, but I do still believe that as a local lad, if the intention is to come back, the only thing that's going to stop Joe Tomlinson ending up in a Swindon Town shirt next season will be the price tag that Darren McAntony, who's a very shrewd operator, will be the price tag that he puts on him.
As much as I would love it, I just can't see Tomlinson coming back. I actually think Tomlinson could probably push to play for Peterborough, and he will be close enough to the first team that he's not going out on loan.
Well, that was the thing, Chris, wasn't it? With Joe Tomlinson was actually in and around the first team. It's just he wanted to be starting football matches.
Yeah.
And Darren McAntony made it very, very clear at the start of the season when we had the friendly with them, and his name was mentioned a few weeks later, and he was made it very clear that they really, I think he referred to him as young Joe, they really rate him. And obviously they've been relegated. So I think I think he'd be very, very comfortable at League One level.
Yeah, but if he's not in the team, early on in the season, that's a bit different because he signed a 2-year deal, so this will be his last year. And so if he's not in there, then there's an option. But I think to start the season, not a chance.
Yeah, I'm with you, mate. I think I can see him running his contract down at Peterborough, and I don't think it would be a shock that we see Tomlinson back in a red and white shirt. Just I don't believe it's going to be at the start of next season. So
I completely agree with that. I get the impression that he wants to play for Swindon, but unfortunately, contracts are you know what contracts are like.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think what I'll do, Andrew, I'll try and bring you in, Andrew, at this stage, just with an eye on next season. And whilst I know this isn't a pep rally, I certainly think we've discussed enough kind of positive and reinforced enough positivity in and around our football club to sort of warm everyone's cockles after what was a very disappointing night last night. I think the first question I've got for you is this. Should we be, just sort of taking stock and going into next season with enormous amounts of optimism and renewed vigour? And if the answer to that question is yes, what's the one thing you would ask Swindon Town fans to be considering over the next week or two, should they be having any doubts?
Oh, blimey, that's a good question. I always tend on the cautious side, but I think you've clearly got reasons for cautious optimism in that there's an infinitely more professional structure around the club than there was before. There should be less problems, one would hope, in attracting players and good players for the level. When you've seen both the way the team play and the kind of enthusiasm of fans and the crowd, and the general nature of the environment, and not the fact they're scrambling around a couple of weeks before the start of the season. So you would hope that there's a sort of team and a coaching structure all in place that there wasn't ready to start with. We've seen that the sort of recruitment that Ben Chorley's worked on has been pretty good. So even if you lose one or two, you'd be fairly hopeful on his track record so far that they can find good replacements on the budget. I guess if I was going to give a message, and I'm hardly here to throw out trumpets or tell people what to think, is I suppose is perhaps almost not to get the other way, not to get too dizzy or downhearted if for any reason it doesn't start well, really, because you've kind of seen the methodology and the coaching from this season work, and if things don't go well at the start, you've got a coaching team from what we've seen that have the ability to improve players that they bring in. So hopefully those are sort of slightly guarded but reasonably sensible messages as to why they can, touch would be another good season.
No, I think you're bang on, Andrew. And on that about if there was a slow start, I'll just remind everybody of the 2010 season that, whilst ended in disappointment at Wembley, produced some of the most sparkling football and had some of the most sort of gifted players of recent times in the Swindon Town shirt. Messrs. Austin, Painter, Danny Ward, etc., who opened the season with a 5-0 gubbing at the hands of Gillingham. So hold on to your hats. I think I think we should all be tipping our hats to Swindon Town Football Club off the back of what we've seen this season, saluting the progress that we've seen. Yeah, there's been ups and downs, but the football has been much more akin to what I think Swindon Town means and represents in people's minds. And I think we're going to retain enough quality going into pre-season, and I think we're going to add significant quality to that. That next season should bode very, very, very well for us indeed. It'll be a much more competitive League Two, and I don't think it will be as tight at the top, as deep in position as it has been this year. But I think we've got it all to play for. I'm super pumped. I think. What we'll do, I think we'll draw a close to proceedings there. Good sort of 2 hours and a good 40 minutes under our belt. So I thank everyone for your contributions tonight, guys. I will. Dan Designs has been having a good listen in as one of my two headline partners of our show. We've got a signed portrait from last night's penalty hero, Lewis Ward, that we will be giving out. So keep an eye on your direct messages, because one of you lucky buggers that joined in tonight is going to be picking that up for your contributions. So we thank you for that. Chris is my co-host for tonight. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
As always, Hannes.
Oh, you're very well. That's very nice to hear. Well, open invite to come back on. And
it's been a bit too long to expose my weird accent.
No, I don't know. No, I've enjoyed every second of it. I've not made reference to it, but I've enjoyed every second of it. And Andrew, likewise yourself. Thank you ever so much. I appreciate it. Very busy late night for you last night, both on the roads and up in the commentary box. So thanks for another lengthy stint in the cause of Swindon Town Football Club.
One thing though, Hannes,
no worries.
Hannes, before you go,
next
season you'll be coming up to join me and Danny in Doncaster, will you?
1,000,000%.
Yeah,
a million
percent. Good lad.
A little bit of housekeeping just to round off, guys. Please be clear. The Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge is an independent Swindon Town fan podcast. It does not represent the views of Swindon Town Football Club nor Sir Tom Broadbent himself, unless Sir Tom comes on and allows his dulcet tones to fill your ears full of things that might draw controversy, which he very rarely does, but nonetheless he might, and that's up to him. It's been brilliant having you all on. Hope you enjoy the show. If you're listening on catch up, brilliant having you. Thanks for all the support and encouragement. The number of messages we get from you guys grows by the week, and we're chuffed to hear them. It really does mean the world. We've got a special guest on next week. We've got silly questions with none other than Trust STFC chairman Alex Pollock, who's going to be joining us on Wednesday for what will be one of our last shows ahead of a much required summer break and recharge. But yeah, this is the Tom Broadbent Lounge, guys, brought to you in association with Verilogic and Dan Designs. It's been my distinct pleasure having you. Thanks very much for joining.